Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awaken the power of the Absolute Zero and get married with Rukia Kuchiki? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unwarming Sun. The cicadas of Konohagakure were liars. They sang of heat, of oppressive, shimmering waves rising from the packed earth and tiled roofs, of a sun so belligerent it bleached the very color from the sky. They shrieked a symphony of summer, a promise of sweat-slicked skin and the desperate search for shade. And for 99% of the village, that promise was kept. The air hung thick and wet, a blanket woven from humidity and the scent of overripe plums from the Yamanaka orchards. Shopkeepers fanned themselves with paper fans, their motions languid and defeated. And the most energetic of academy students dragged their feet, the will to prank baked out of them. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly miserable, perfectly normal August day in the land of fire. But Chuki Ichiraku, a man who had measured the seasons of his life by the steam rising from his ramen bowls, knew something was fundamentally wrong. His stall, a landmark as integral to Konoha as the Hokage monument, was an oasis of savory warmth. Yet, for the past hour, a peculiar chill had been creeping from the corner stool on the far left. It was a dry, invasive cold, utterly alien to the soupy air. It leached the heat from the wooden counter, leaving the grain feeling brittle and dead to the touch. It stole the steam from the simmering pork broth, causing it to wisp away into nothingness before it could properly scent the air. Chuki, wiping down the counter for the 10th time, could feel the goosebumps rising on his forearms, a sensation so out of place he almost mistrusted it. The source of this anomaly was the village hero. Naruto Uzumaki sat hunched over a bowl of miso ramen, his back to the rest of the world. He wasn't attacking the meal with his usual whirlwind fervor, a chayati. Symphony of slurping and joyous proclamations. He ate slowly, methodically, his movements measured and quiet. The vibrant orange of his jacket was gone, replaced by a simple black tunic and dark pants, the attire of a man. Not a maelstrom. The sun-bright chaos of his youth had settled into something deep and still. His blonde hair was a little longer, his shoulders broader, the lines of his face honed by battles Chuki could scarcely comprehend. He was the savior of their world, the boy who had tamed monsters and befriended gods, yet here at this counter, he looked isolated. Another one, Naruto? Chuki asked, his voice a practiced, gentle rumble. Naruto didn't look up, merely nodding. His gaze was fixed on his bowl. Chuki watched, fascinated and deeply unsettled, as the faintest, shimmering layer of ice crystals formed on the ceramic rim, directly in front of where Naruto's breath should have been warming it. A bowl of ramen, fresh from a boiling cauldron, was developing frost. Kid, are you all right? Chuki pressed, leaning a little closer. He could feel the cold intensifying, a palpable presence that seemed to drink the sound from the air. The drone of the cicadas felt distant. You've been quiet lately. Everything okay with Kakashi-sensei? Naruto finally lifted his head. His eyes, the color of a clear summer sky, held a storm of their own. They were shadowed with a weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. It was the fatigue of a man wrestling with an idea he couldn't punch. Everything's fine, old man, he said, and his voice was lower than it used to be. The boisterous edge sanded away. Just thinking. Thinking's all well and good, Chuki said, expertly dunking a fresh batch of noodles into the water. But a hero needs his fuel. You're barely making a dent. Naruto offered a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. Not that hungry today, I guess. He pushed the half-eaten bowl away. As his hand left the counter, Chuki saw a perfect spiderweb pattern of frost left behind on the wood, a delicate, impossible etching that began to melt almost immediately into a dark, wet stain. Naruto. But the boy, the man, was already standing. He placed a few ryo on the counter. The coins shockingly cold to Chuki's touch when he picked them up. Thanks for the meal. With another nod, he was gone, melting back into the bustling street. The chill lingered for a moment. A ghost in the humid air, before the oppressive summer heat rushed back in to reclaim its territory. The cicadas roared back to life. Ayame, his daughter, came from the back, fanning her face. Dad, is the cooler acting up again? It felt like a freezer out here for a second. Chuki stared at the wet patch on his counter, the ghost of an impossible winter. He though, UGHT of the boy who had once radiated warmth like a second sun, who could light up a room with a single grin. Now, he carried a private winter with him, a cold that even a steaming bowl of Ichiraku ramen couldn't seem to touch. And that, more than any invading army or rampaging demon, scared Chuki to his very soul. Naruto's apartment was a testament to his struggle. On the windowsill, a collectee. On of small potted plants, a gift from Ino, who insisted he needed more life in his living space, were dead. They weren't withered from lack of water or sunlight. Their leaves were brown and brittle, their stems rigid. Flash frozen from the inside out. He had tried everything. He moved them to the far side of the room, but the cold was a part of him, an aura he couldn't seem to shed. It clung to his chakra like a shroud. He sank onto his couch, the worn fabric groaning in protest. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers catching in the unruly strands. It had started subtly a few months ago. A strange coolness when he molded his chakra. Then came the incidents. A cup of tea freezing solid in his hand as he was lost in thought. A puddle turning to a sheet of ice as he stepped over it on a mission. The whispers from his students in the genin team he was intermittently mentoring for Kakashi. They admired him, worshipped him even, but they kept their distance. They felt the chill. This wasn't an ice-style jutsu. He had fought Haku. He had felt the crisp, biting cold of a Hyoden Kekai Genkei. That was the manipulation of an element, the creation of cold. This was different. This was the absence of everything else. It was a profound and terrifying stillness. When his power flared, he didn't feel a rush of cold chakra, he felt a void, a pulling sensation, as if all the energy, all the warmth, all the motion around him was being drawn into a pinpoint of nothingness centered in his own body. He closed his eyes, focusing inward, past the roaring, familiar furnace of Kurama's chakra. The great fox was just as perplexed as he was. It's not me, kid, the Kyuubi's voice rumbled in his mind, a familiar bass note in the chaos. My chakra is life, fire, even hatred, but it is always energy. This thing, it's the opposite. It's an ending. Naruto focused deeper, searching for the source. There it was. A tiny, crystalline structure interwoven with his very soul, a nexus point where golden energy of the Sage of Six Paths, the crimson torrent of Kurama, and a sliver of something else, something alien and vast and utterly empty, a remnant of Keigaya's final, desperate attack, had fused. It was a new Kekai Genkei. Or maybe a dojutsu that had yet to manifest in his eyes. He didn't know. All he knew was that it was growing, and he couldn't control it. He remembered the final moments of the war. The combined power of Team 7, the sealing of the rabbit goddess, the blinding flash of light and energy that had rewritten the laws of their world for a heartbeat. He had come back changed, the hero. But he hadn't come back whole. He had come back with this 0 point nested in his soul. He stood up, pacing the small room. He was a master of control. He could balance nature energy perfectly. Wield Kurama's apocalyptic power with precision, form a Rasengan in the palm of his hand without a single wasted flicker of chakra. But this was different. Trying to control it was like trying to grab a fistful of vacuum. There was nothing to hold. The only way to stop it was to not use his chakra at all, to sit perfectly still and meditate, to become as calm and empty as the power itself. For a man like Naruto Uzumaki, that was a fate worse than death. His gaze fell upon the team photo on his nightstand. Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi. His family. Sasuke was gone again, wandering the world on his journey of atonement. But his presence was a steady weight in Naruto's heart. Sakura was revolutionizing medical ninjutsu, a force of nature in her own right. Kakashi was Hokage, carrion. A burden Naruto knew would one day be his. They had fought for a future of peace, of warmth. And here he was, a walking cold front, a potential natural disaster who couldn't even keep a cactus alive. The irony was a bitter pill. He, the child of the sun god prophecy, the one who was supposed to connect everyone, was now a source of isolation. He had to master this. For Konoha. For his friends. For his personal winter became everyone's. The Hokage's office was an island of strained normalcy in the sweltering village. Kakashi Hatake, the sixth Hokage, sat behind his desk, the infamous orange book conspicuously absent. In its place were stacks of scrolls and reports, each one a headache in literary form. His single visible eye was narrowed, not with boredom, but with intense focus. Across from him, Shikamaru Nara slouched in a chair, the very picture of put-upon genius. It's getting worse, Kakashi-sensei, Shikamaru said, his voice flat. He pushed a scroll across the desk. This is a report from the Meteorology Corps. They've been tracking anomalous temperature drops throughout the village for the past 2 months. All of them, without exception, coincide with Naruto's location. Kakashi picked up the scroll, his gaze scanning the neatly written columns of data. Ambient temperature drops of up to 15 degrees Celsius in a 5-meter radius. Condensation freezing on metal surfaces in direct summer sunlight. Soil temperature in his training ground dropping below zero, killing root systems 50 centimeters deep. What a drag. He mimicked Shikamaru's favorite phrase wit. A complete lack of his subordinate's languor. You can say that again, Shikamaru sighed, scratching the back of his head. The problem is, we don't know what it is. Shino's Kikaichu bugs avoid him. They literally fall dormant if they get too close. Hiba says Akamaru whines and refuses to approach. It's not a standard elemental affinity. We cross-referenced every known Kekai Genkei in the bingo books. Even the extinct ones from Uzushio and the Land of Snow. Nothing matches. It's not just a jutsu, Kakashi mused, tapping a finger on the desk. It's a state of being. The reports from the Anbu squad tailing him are poetic. They say the air around him feels thin and quiet. That sound doesn't carry properly. It's like a bubble of altered reality. That's the part that's troublesome, Shikamaru agreed, leaning forward. His usual apathy replaced by a sharp-edged intensity. If it were just an ice jutsu, we could analyze it, find a counter, help him control it. But this feels like a fundamental law of nature is being bent out of shape around him. And Naruto is the fulcrum. What happens if he loses his temper? Or gets seriously injured and loses control? Could he flash freeze this entire office? The village. The unspoken question hung in the air, heavy and cold. The Fourth Great Shinobi War had been won by a display of almost unimaginable power. They had witnessed what happened when individuals wielded the ability to reshape the world. Naruto was their greatest asset, their beloved hero, but he was also, potentially, their greatest threat. We need more information, Kakashi said. His voice firm. Sasuke's out of range of communication. Sakura has run every medical diagnostic possible. His chakra coils are stable, his health is perfect. She says it's like trying to diagnose a ghost. So, we're stuck, Shikamaru concluded, slumping back in his chair. We watch and wait while our strongest shinobi becomes a walking natural disaster. What a pain. Not entirely, Kakashi said, his eye crinkling in a way that suggested a smile hidden beneath his mask. We have one more avenue. The sealing jutsu that imprisoned Kagaya. It was a joint effort, powered by the Sage of Six Paths. But Naruto and Sasuke were the keys. This power manifested in Naruto after that final seal was locked. It's possible it's a side effect. An unforeseen consequence. You want to analyze the seal. Shikamaru's eyes widened slightly. That's god-tier jutsu theory. It would take our entire decryption core years, maybe decades. I know, Kakashi admitted. Which is why I've been reviewing the archives. Specifically, the fourth Hokage's notes on space-time ninjutsu and the Uzumaki clan's most esoteric fuinjutsu. My sensei was tampering with the fabric of reality itself. If anyone left behind a clue to understanding something like this, it was him. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window, to the sprawling, vibrant village he was sworn to protect. Naruto brought peace to this world, Shikamaru. He carries the will of so many who have fallen. We can't let him face this alone. It's our duty to find an answer. No matter how troublesome it is. Shikamaru watched his Hokage. A man often derided for his tardiness and peculiar habits, but whose will in moments of crisis was as unbending as steel. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. Yeah, I get it. I'll start compiling the relevant scrolls. But if this turns into a mountain of paperwork, I'm delegating it to you. Kakashi's eye crinkled again. Wouldn't have it any other way. The air in the Seraite was ancient. It tasted of stillness and spiritual power, a stark contrast to the chaotic, vibrant energy of the mortal world. Here, in the heart of the Soul Society, time moved at a different pace. Measured in the slow erosion of stone and the changing of captain commanders. In the main hall of the 1st Division Barracks, Shunsui Kyoraku, the aforementioned captain commander, sat perched on a windowsill. His floral pink kimono draped carelessly over his standard Shinigami uniform. He fanned himself slowly, a painted fan depicting a lazy carp in a pond. My, oh my, he murmured to no one in particular. This is quite the pickle. Before him, suspended in the air by a complex Kido, was a three-dimensional map of the known spiritual dimensions. It showed the Soul Society, the world of the living, and Hawako Mundo as three interconnected, glowing spheres. But something was wrong. On the edge of the sphere representing the world of the living, a new shape was forming. It wasn't a glow, but its opposite. A patch of absolute, impenetrable black. Report, Lieutenant Eyes, Shunsui said, his lazy tone belying the sharp intelligence in his eyes. His lieutenant, Nanao Eyes, stood ramrod straight a few paces away. Her face severe behind her glasses. She held a data slate that glowed with complex equations. Sir, the anomaly first appeared on our long-range sensors 3 months ago. We initially believed it to be a sensor malfunction. However, the phenomenon is not only stable, it is slowly expanding. Expanding how? Shunsui asked, taking a sip from a small sake gourd. It is difficult to describe. Captain Commander, Nanao said, her voice tight with academic frustration. It is not consuming reishi in the way a garganta or a powerful hollow would. The spiritual particles are not being destroyed or absorbed. They simply cease to be. The readings from this void are absolute nothingness. No energy, no particles, no spiritual residue. It is a dead zone, a patch of non-existence that is growing at a rate of 0.02% per week. Shunsui stopped fanning. Non-existence, he repeated softly. That's a word that gives even old men like me the shivers. Have we tried sending a hell butterfly? We have, sir. 3 of them, Nanao reported. They crossed the boundary of the anomaly and their connection to us was severed instantly. Not faded, not distorted. It was as if they never existed at all. A heavy silence filled the hall. Even for the Gote 13, who dealt with the souls of the dead and monsters from a desert of white sand, the concept of true nothingness was terrifying. It was an affront to the cycle of reincarnation, to the very structure of their reality. The source, Shunsui said, his voice losing its lazy drawl, becoming the sharp instrument of command it truly was. Where is it centered? Nanao tapped her slate. The epicenter appears to be in the world of the living. In a location previously uncharted by our sensors. A large continent, shielded by some form of energy that has, until recently, made it invisible to our long-range spiritual detection. We believe the emergence of this void is what caused the shield to destabilize. A hidden continent of mortals, Shunsui mused. Full of surprises, that little blue sphere. And what kind of power could cause that? We have no precedent, sir, Nanao admitted. The energy required to create a stable pocket of absolute null energy would theoretically exceed that of a full-powered Hogyoku. It is a cosmological event, not the work of a single being. At least, that is what our theory suggests. And theories, my dear Nanao, Shunsui said, pushing himself off the windowsill, are often just pretty stories we tell ourselves until the monster kicks down the door. This isn't a cosmological event. It's too small, too focused. It has a source. Something, or someone, is the anchor for this stillness. And we need to know who. He walked towards the center of the room, his shadow stretching long in the ethereal light. This requires a delicate touch. Not a show of force. We need an investigator, someone who is an expert in unusual spiritual phenomena, someone who can operate independently and adapt to a completely alien environment. His gaze swept over the map, settling on the black void. There is one person who comes to mind, he said, a faint smile on his lips. She has a knack for finding herself in the middle of impossible situations in the world of the living. And she has a good heart, which might be the most important tool for this mission. Nanao's expression remained impassive, but she knew exactly who he meant. Shall I summon her, Captain Commander? Please, Shunsui said. Summon Lieutenant Rukia Kuchiki of the 13th Division. Tell her to pack for a world she's never seen before. Rukia Kuchiki stood before the Senkaimon, the gate of the soul passageway. Her Zanpakuto, Soda no Shirayuki, was secure at her hip, its pure white hilt a comforting weight. She was dressed in a standard black Shinigami Shihakusho, but a small pack on her back contained a gigai and other mission essentials. Her face, framed by her short, black hair, was a mask of calm professionalism. But her mind was a whirlwind. A hidden continent. An energy that wasn't reishi. A void that erased existence. The mission briefing had been short on facts and long on terrifying speculation. Captain Yukitaki, her own frail but kind captain, had wished her well with a worried look in his gentle eyes. Her brother, Byakuya, had simply met her gaze and given a single, almost imperceptible nod, his version of a blessing. This was different from her time in Karakura town. This was not a routine assignment. This was a plunge into the complete unknown. The gate is stabilized, Lieutenant, a member of the Gate Corps announced. Coordinates locked on the epicenter of the spiritual void. Rukia took a deep breath, the ancient air of the Seraite filling her lungs one last time. She placed a hand on the hilt of her blade. The cool metal a familiar anchor. Duty was her guide. Protection was her purpose. She would not fail. With a final, determined look, she stepped through the shimmering portal. The journey through the Dongai, the precipice world, was always disorienting, a rushing torrent of disconnected time and space. But the exit was a shock unlike any she had ever experienced. She emerged not in a clean, spiritually defined alleyway of a modern city, but in a forest clearing of breathtaking vitality. The air, she had never imagined air could feel this way. It was thick, heavy, and thrumming with a wild, untamed energy that was nothing like the orderly reishi of the Soul Society or the thin, scattered particles of a normal human city. It was raw, chaotic, and felt overwhelmingly alive. It coated her skin, filled her senses, a pressure that was almost physical. Chakra, she recalled from the briefing. This was a world saturated with it. The sounds were deafening. Insects she couldn't name buzzed and chirped in a cacophony. The scent of damp earth, strange, fragrant blossoms, and pine filled her nose. It was a world of profound, sensory overload. She drew a small, compass-like device from her pouch. It was a spiritual anomaly detector, designed to point towards disturbances. The needle, instead of pointing, was spinning frantically, unable to lock onto anything in this soup of foreign energy. Useless, she muttered, stowing it away. She would have to rely on her own senses. She closed her eyes, extending her own Raryoku, her spiritual power, trying to eel past the overwhelming static of the chakra. There. It was not a presence, but an absence. A hole in the vibrant tapestry of the world. A point of profound, unnatural calm in the middle of the energetic chaos. It was distant, miles away. But it was unmistakable. It felt cold. Not a physical cold, but a conceptual one. A place where the world's vibrant song went silent. Her Shinigami senses, honed over decades of hunting hollows, locked onto that stillness. It was the source. She took off, her movements silent and swift, a black shadow flitting through the dense, alien trees. She used Shunpo, flash step, in short bursts. The unfamiliar energy of the world making sustained use difficult. The forest gave way to rolling hills and farmland. In the distance, nestled in a vast basin surrounded by a sheer wall of rock, was a village. It was massive, far larger than any settlement she had seen in Japan. A mountain overlooked it, with great faces carved into the stone. Her destination was within that village. The feeling of stillness was growing stronger, more focused. She landed softly atop a large gate, concealing her presence behind the tiled roofing. From this vantage point, she surveyed the bustling streets below. The people here looked different. They wore strange clothing, and many had pouches strapped to their legs. They moved with a casual athleticism that spoke of a life of physical training. Then she saw him. He was walking down the main thoroughfare, a lone figure moving against the tide of the crowd. He was young, with hair the color of the sun and eyes the color of the sky. He wore simple black clothes. But it wasn't his appearance that made Rukia's breath catch in her chest. It was the bubble of reality around him. As he walked, people gave him a wide berth, an unconscious, instinctual reaction. A street vendor's cart, laden with brightly colored pinwheels, fell silent as he passed, the toys ceasing their cheerful spinning for a few seconds before fluttering back to life. A stray dog, trotting happily, stopped dead in its tracks, whimpered, and darted down an alley. From her perch, Rukia could feel it with perfect clarity. The thrumming, overwhelming sea. Chakra of this world was warped around him. It didn't flow into him or out of him. It bent away, as if afraid to touch him. At his center was the void. The absolute null point. The stillness that was unraveling the border between dimensions. This boy, this single, solitary young man, was the source of it all. He was the cosmological anomaly. He was the walking, breathing patch of non-existence that the Soul Society feared. And as he looked up, his blue eyes sweeping the rooftops with a casual alertness that spoke of a seasoned warrior, her gaze met his for a fraction of a second. In that instant, Rukia Kuchiki understood that her mission, and her entire understanding of the universe, had just become infinitely more complicated. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A silence between heartbeats. The moon was a sharp, silver sickle hung in a sea of indigo. It offered little light, its gaze largely swallowed by the suffocating canopy of Training Ground 44, a place the villagers still called the Forest of Death. The name was well earned. Here, the trees grew with a cancerous malevolence, their branches twisting into gnarled claws that seemed to scrape at the stars. The air was thick with the ghosts of shed blood and the lingering terror of countless Chunin exams. It was a place of predators, both natural and spectral, a perfect, isolated stage for Naruto's private war. He stood in a small, cratered clearing. A relic from some long-forgotten battle. His breathing was steady, a conscious, measured rhythm of inhale and exhale. He was trying to find his center, the calm eye of the hurricane that was his own chakra. Around his feet, the grass was rimmed with a delicate, silver frost, a stark contradiction to the humid night air that clung to his skin like a second tunic. Control is just a matter of balance, he told himself. The mantra a well-worn path in his mind. Like balancing nature energy. Too little and it's useless. Too much and you turn to stone. Find the fulcrum. He raised his right hand, palm up, and focused. He didn't try to mold his chakra into a shape, not a Rasengan or even a simple clone. Instead, he reached for the well of stillness within him, the crystalline anomaly he now knew was a part of his soul. He tried to coax it, to gently draw out a sliver of its power. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air above his palm began to shimmer, distorting like a heat haze in reverse. A single, perfect snowflake materialized from the humid air, then another, and another. They spun in a miniature, silent cyclone above his hand. He held his breath, concentrating, feeding the tiniest trickle of his will into the phenomenon. The cyclone grew, the flakes multiplying, becoming a fist-sized orb of swirling white. It was beautiful, serene. He felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could master this. Maybe he could learn to wield it as a tool. He tried to push it further, to expand the orb's radius by a mere inch. It was like pulling the pin on a grenade. The balance shattered. The gentle coaxing became a violent, insatiable pull. The orb of snowflakes did not expand. It collapsed in on itself, and in its place, a wave of absolute cold erupted from his hand. It wasn't a blast of wind or ice. It was a wave of pure cessation. The humid air flash crystallized, the moisture hanging in the atmosphere turning to a fog of glittering ice dust. The ground at his feet turned white, then a deep, translucent blue. Freezing solid in an instant. The wave rolled outwards, silent and inexorable. The ancient trees in its path groaned as their sap froze, their leaves turning to brittle glass. A nightingale, perched on a branch 50 feet away, was caught in the wave, its song cut off mid-trill. It hung there, a perfect, frozen statue, its beak open to release a note that would never be heard. The wave stopped 100 feet out, forming a perfect circle of unnatural winter in the heart of the sweltering forest. The sudden silence was more shocking than any explosion. The symphony of the night. The crickets. The rustling of unseen creatures, the whisper of wind through leaves, had been utterly and completely erased within that circle. Naruto stood at the epicenter, his hand still outstretched, trembling. He stared at the devastation, his heart a cold stone in his chest. This wasn't a tool. It was a cataclysm. He hadn't created ice. He had stolen the life and energy from a piece of the world, leaving only a static, frozen husk. He could feel Kurama stirring in his mind, not with anger, but with a deep, primal unease. This power, Naruto, it does not belong in a world of the living. I know, Naruto whispered to the silent, frozen trees. The frost on the ground crunched under his boots as he took a step, the sound unnervingly loud in the dead air. He had to get this under control. He had to. He couldn't let this ending he carried inside him ever touch another living soul. He was so consumed by his failure, so lost in the profound silence of his own making, that he almost missed the sound that didn't belong. It was a soft, sharp scrape. The sound of a sandal landing on a high branch just outside his circle of winter. Naruto's head snapped up, his senses, honed by a lifetime of war, screaming to full alert. The weariness in his eyes was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused glare of a veteran shinobi. Who's there? He called out, his voice sharp and carrying in the still air. Show yourself. For a long moment, there was only the whisper of the wind in the living trees beyond his frozen circle. Then, a figure dropped from the canopy, landing with impossible lightness on the edge of the frosted ground. It was a girl, or a young woman, small and slight, dressed in a strange, black, wide-sleeved uniform. A sword was strapped to her waist. Her hair was a slash of jet black in the moonlight, her features fine and aristocratic, her violet eyes holding a depth that spoke of age and authority far beyond her youthful appearance. It was the woman from the village. The one whose gaze had met his for a fleeting second that afternoon. Rukia Kuchiki stood at the boundary between the living forest and Naruto's accidental wasteland. The air from the frozen circle washed over her. And it was a sensation that defied all her Shinigami experience. It wasn't just cold. It was empty. The reishi, the spiritual particles that made up all things in Bo. The soul society and the world of the living, were simply gone inside that circle. It was a spiritual vacuum. She had felt this emptiness from afar, but to stand at its edge was to stare into an abyss. You, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. He shifted his stance, his body coiling like a spring. He had felt her watching him in the village, a flicker of an energy signature he couldn't identify. You're not from around here. Who are you? My name is Rukia Kuchiki, she replied, her voice crisp and formal. She did not draw her sword, but her hand rested lightly on its hilt. I am a Shinigami of the Gote 13. And I have come to investigate the source of a significant spiritual disturbance. A source that appears to be you. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Shinigami. A death god. Gote 13. Those are just words to me. You're either with Konoha or you're an enemy. Pick one. Rukia felt a flicker of annoyance at his bluntness. She was accustomed to a certain level of deference, or at least fear. This man, despite the apocalyptic power he had just unleashed, seemed entirely unimpressed. My jurisdiction transcends your village politics. The phenomenon you are creating is threatening the balance between worlds. This void, she gestured to the frozen circle, is disrupting the flow of souls and tearing a hole in the fabric of reality. I must insist you explain what you are and how you are doing this. His response was a short, bitter laugh. You think I'm doing this? You think I want this? He swept his arm out, indicating the frozen nightingale, the glass-like leaves. I'm trying to stop it. And the last thing I need is some black-robed stranger with a sword making demands. He took a step towards her, and the frost on the ground crackled under his feet. Now you answer my question. Who sent you? What do you want here? My mission is to identify and neutralize threats to the Soul Society, Rukia stated, her eyes hardening. His spiritual pressure, his ryutsu, was the strangest thing she had ever sensed. It was immense, larger than any captain's, but it was also chaotic and overlaid with another, wilder energy signature that felt like a caged beast. And beneath all was the terrifying stillness of the void. As of this moment, you are the primary threat. Then you're an enemy, Naruto concluded, his voice dropping the last of its conversational tone. He fell into the familiar fighting stance of the Uzumaki clan, low and balanced. He wasn't going to use that power, but he had 1,000 other ways to fight. I'm giving you one chance. Leave this forest. Leave Konoha. Go back to your soul society, and forget you ever saw me. Rukia's hand tightened on Sota no Shirayuki. She had faced down a Rancor, battled alongside Ichigo Kurosaki against impossible odds. She would not be intimidated. I cannot do that. You are an anomaly that must be contained. Their standoff was absolute, a silent battle of wills waged across the border of frost. The air crackled with unspoken power. Naruto's chakra began to rise, a visible golden aura shimmering around him, melting the frost at his feet. Rukia's spiritual power flared in response, a column of cool, white energy. They were two predators from entirely different ecosystems, poised to tear each other apart out of pure, primal misunderstanding. And then, a third predator entered the field. It came from the forest floor, erupting from the damp earth just outside the frozen circle in a shower of dirt and splintered roots. It was a thing of nightmare, a perversion of nature. It was vaguely humanoid in shape but stood over 10 feet tall. Its body a grotesque fusion of pale, bark-like flesh and writhing, thorny vines. It had no face, only a gaping hole in its chest, the signature mark of a hollow. But this was no ordinary hollow. Its mask was a crude, wooden thing, like a twisted version of an Anbu mask, and the vines that coiled around its limbs pulsed with a sickly green energy that was unmistakably, sickeningly, nature chakra. Rukia stared, her mind struggling to process the contradictory signals. It had the spiritual signature of a hollow, but it was saturated with the physical energy of this world. It was an aberration, a monster born from the collision of their two realities. The creature let out a shriek, a sound like tearing wood and grinding stone, and fixed its attention on the strongest sources of power in the area, Naruto and Rukia. Naruto didn't hesitate. His animosity towards Rukia was instantly forgotten, superseded by the shinobi's most fundamental instinct: protect the innocent from the monster. Get back, he yelled at her, already weaving hand signs. He slammed his palm on the ground. Doden. Doryuheiki. Earth style wall. A massive wall of soli. D-rock erupted between them and the creature. It was a textbook defensive maneuver, meant to buy time and assess the enemy. The chakra hollow, however, didn't try to go around it or smash through it. Instead, the vines on its arms pulsed with the green light, and they grew at an explosive rate, burrowing into the earth wall. In seconds, the solid rock crumbled from within, reduced to sand and peb. Less as the chakra-infused roots turned it to dust. It consumed the jutsu, Naruto said, his eyes wide with disbelief. The hollow shrieked again and swiped at him with a clawed hand wreathed in thorny vines. Naruto dodged, a blur of motion, but the vines extended mid-swipe, lashing out like whips. He was forced to leap back, several shallow cuts opening on his arms. It adapts, Rukia called out, her analytical mind taking over. She had already drawn her Zanpakuto. Its spiritual composition is hollow, but it is augmented by the energy of your world. My attacks may be more effective. She flashed forward in a burst of shunpo. Her white blade a blur. She aimed for the creature's arm, a clean, precise strike meant to sever the limb. Her blade met its bark-like hide and produced a shower of sparks, skittering off with a screech of tortured metal. It was like striking diamond-hard wood. The force of the blow barely even slowed the creature down. It spun, its other arm lashing out. Rukia was forced onto the defensive, parrying a relentless barrage of attacks. Each blow felt like being struck by a battering ram. It's not working, Naruto yelled, creating two shadow clones. The three Narutos converged on the monster from different angles. Let's see how you like this. Rasengan. The original Naruto slammed the spiraling sphere of pure chakra into the creature's back. The impact was immense, kicking up a storm of dust and debris. For a moment, it seemed to work. The creature staggered, a large crater gouged into its woody flesh. But then, the sickening green light flared. The vines around the wound writhed, pulling the crater closed, regenerating the damage in seconds. The chakra from the Rasengan, instead of destroying it, seemed to have been absorbed, fueling its recovery. It's eating chakra, Naruto shouted in alarm as his clones were swatted away, dissipating in puffs of smoke. My ninjutsu is just feeding it. Rukia, leaping back to create distance, came to the same conclusion from her side. Its hide is too dense for standard sword strikes, and its spiritual pressure is too entangled with this chakra to be easily disrupted. It's defending against both our power systems. She landed beside Naruto, the two of them now presenting a united front against the monstrosity. So your soul-slicing sword doesn't work, and my ninja magic is a free lunch, Naruto summarized grimly, wiping a trickle of blood from his cheek. Got any other bright ideas, Shinigami? I have Kido, she said, raising a hand. Spells that transcend simple swordplay. But I need an opening. She glanced at him, her violet eyes intense. Can you distract it? Draw its attention. Naruto grinned, a flash of the old, confident rogue. Distracting big, ugly monsters is my specialty. He formed a cross seal with his fingers. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The clearing was instantly filled with 24 identical copies of Naruto Uzumaki. They swarmed the chakra hollow, a chaotic, chattering tide of orange and black. They didn't use ninjutsu, instead relying on pure taijutsu, a flurry of kicks and punches that hammered against the creature's hide. They were a perfect distraction, an overwhelming flood of targets. Now, Naruto Prime yelled. Rukia's hands became a blur of motion as she began her incantation. Ye Lord. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Truth and temperance. Upon this sinless wall of dreams but slightly strike the wrath of your claws. Hado number 33. Sokatsui. Pale fire crash. A massive torrent of blue spiritual energy erupted from her palm. A cannon blast of pure destructive force. It slammed into the creature's chest, right where the hollow hole was. The impact was enormous, blasting away the swarm of clones and sending the monster staggering backward. Its chest smoking and charred. For a moment, they thought it had worked. But then the green light pulsed again, weaker this time, but still present. The vines writhed, slowly beginning to repair the damage. It's still regenerating, Rukia said, breathing heavily. The Sokatsui had taken a significant amount of her power. Before the creature could fully recover, it opened its mouthless face. And the hole in its chest began to glow with a malevolent, condensed red light. The energy it was gathering was immense, a mix of stolen nature chakra and its own hollow power. Sero. Rukia yelled, her eyes wide with alarm. It was a Sero, the signature energy blast of a hollow, but it was being amplified, corrupted by the chakra it had consumed. Naruto didn't need a translation. He knew a world-ending laser beam when he saw one. He knew he couldn't block it with a Rasengan, the creature would just absorb it. He couldn't dodge it without leaving the Shinigami girl, Rukia, exposed. And his earth wall would be annihilated. There was only one option. One power he couldn't control, that terrified him to his very core. But it was the only thing that wasn't made of chakra. It was the opposite. As the chakra hollow unleashed the corrupted Sero, a spiraling beam of red and green energy that tore a trench in the ground as it flew, Naruto moved. He didn't try to meet it with force. He stepped directly into its path, his expression a mask of pure, desperate concentration. He held up his right hand, not to block, but to receive. He reached for the 0 point. This time, he didn't try to coax it. He didn't try to control it. He simply opened the floodgates. Rukia watched, horrified, as a sphere of absolute blackness, no bigger than a fist, materialized in front of Naruto's palm. It wasn't dark like a shadow. It was the color of a hole in the universe. It emitted no light, no energy. It simply was. The air around it warped, moonlight bending as if falling into a singularity. The monstrous Sero, a beam of energy that could have leveled half the forest, struck the tiny black sphere. And vanished. There was no explosion, no impact, no sound. The torrent of destructive energy touched the edge of that sphere and simply ceased to be. It was unwritten from existence, its light, its heat, its kinetic force all reduced to absolute, unequivocal nothing. It was as if the attack had never been fired at all. When the last flicker of the Sero was gone, the black sphere imploded, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Naruto stood in the same spot, his arms still outstretched, his breathing ragged. The sleeve of his tunic around his right arm was gone, disintegrated by the sheer proximity to the void, his skin underneath pale and laced with frost patterns that looked like lightning scars. The forest was silent. The chakra hollow stood motionless, its ultimate attack casually erased. Even the monster seemed confused. Rukia stared, her mind utterly blank with shock. She had seen Captain-class Shinigami stop a Sero with a Bakudo shield. She had seen Ichigo shatter one with his Getsuga Tensho. She had never seen anyone delete one from reality. This wasn't power. It was an anti-power. It was a fundamental violation of the law of conservation of energy. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing she had ever witnessed. Now, Naruto panted, his voice strained. Your turn. His act of negation had bought them the opening they needed. The creature was momentarily stunned, its energy reserves depleted from the massive Sero. Rukia's mind snapped back into focus. He was right. This was their chance. She sheathed her sword and brought her hands together. She would use her strongest binding spell, one that required immense concentration. Bakudo number 61. Raikujokuro. 6-rod light prison. She intoned. 6 wide beams of golden light shot from her fingertips, slamming into the creature's torso and limbs, pinning it in place. The monster struggled, its vines straining against the holy light. But it was held fast. It won't hold for long. Rukia gritted out, sweat beading on her forehead. It's already trying to consume the reishi of the Kido. Naruto looked at the struggling creature. Then at his own trembling, ice-scarred hand. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't risk another uncontrolled wave. He needed precision. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He focused, visualizing the black sphere from before, but this time he wouldn't let it touch the outside world. He would contain it. He walked forward slowly, his blue eyes locked on the monster. He passed Rukia, stepping into the golden glow of her Kido. He stopped just before the thrashing creature and raised his hand again. What are you doing? Rukia asked, her voice tight with strain. Ending this, Naruto said softly. He placed his palm directly on the creature's chest, on the wooden mask that served as its face. He closed his eyes. He didn't unleash a wave of cold. He didn't create an orb of nothingness. He simply activated the 0 point, a perfect, infinitesimally small singularity, and pushed it inside the monster. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the chakra hollow froze. Its struggles ceased. The sickly green glow in its vines faded. A fine, web-like pattern of frost spread from Naruto's hand across its entire body. Its shriek of rage was cut short, and its form began to disintegrate. It didn't explode or fade away like a normal hollow. It crumbled, like a statue carved from dry ash, turning into a fine, gray dust that fell to the forest floor, leaving nothing behind. Naruto pulled his hand back and stumbled away, falling to one knee, breathing heavily. The Raikujokuro faded, its purpose served. The clearing was silent once more. But this was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the dead, empty silence of his power. It was the natural, watchful silence of the night, slowly returning to the ravaged clearing. The ground was torn and scarred, a chaotic mixture of scorched earth and frozen tundra. Rukia stood, her breath catching in her throat, staring at the man kneeling on the ground. The enemy was gone, the threat neutralized. But the questions remained, 1,000 times more pressing than before. She walked over to him, her footsteps soft on the ravaged earth. She looked down at him, this strange, impossible boy who wielded a power that could unmake reality. The animosity between them had been burned away in the heat of battle, replaced by a raw, profound sense of awe and a deep, unsettling uncertainty. He looked up at her, his blue eyes exhausted but clear. The silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken. They were no longer just a Shinigami and a potential threat. They were two soldiers who had survived a battle they should have lost. Bound by the shared secret of the impossible power they had just witnessed. So, Naruto said, his voice raspy. You still think I'm the threat? Rukia didn't have an answer. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Uninvited Gate. The walk back to Konoha was a study in contrasts. The forest, once a place of violent, chaotic battle, had fallen into a deep and watchful peace. The surviving Nocturna, L creatures had resumed their nightly chorus, a tentative symphony rising to fill the void left by the unholy clash of powers. Above, the moon cast long, skeletal shadows through the canopy, illuminate. In patches of the ravaged clearing, one half frozen into a crystalline tableau, the other scorched and blasted by spiritual energy. It was a scar on the world, a testament to their brief, desperate alliance. Between Naruto and Rukia, however, the silence was a living thing, a palpable pressure that replaced the animosity of their first meeting. It was no longer the silence of hostility, but of mutual, shell-shocked assessment. They walked several feet apart, two soldiers from forgotten wars suddenly finding themselves on the same, bewildering battlefield. Rukia was the one who finally broke it. Her mind, trained to observe, analyze, and report, was churning. She had to reconcile the man walking beside her with the apocalyptic anomaly she had been sent to investigate. Your power, she began, her voice carefully neutral. Her gaze fixed on the path ahead. The way you nullified that Sero. I have never seen anything like it. It is not a technique. It is a conceptual rewriting of physical law. Naruto glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He was rubbing his right arm, the skin still pale and etched with faint, frost-like patterns. It's new, he said, his voice ow and laced with a fatigue that went deeper than their recent fight. It's a part of me I don't understand yet. I'm not rewriting anything. More like turning the page off. Turning it off. Rukia repeated softly, testing the alien simplicity of the phrase. It was a shinobi's description for a god's act. That, hollow. It was an aberration. A soul eater corrupted by the energy of this world. Your chakra. My Kido was less effective. And your ninjutsu only fed it. We shouldn't have been able to defeat it. But we did, Naruto stated simply. It wasn't a boast. It was a fact, a single point of stability in a sea of unknowns. Your light thing held it down. My, whatever it is, finished it. We worked together. He stopped, turning to face her fully. In the filtered moonlight, his blue eyes seemed to hold an unusual depth. Look, Rukia, I don't know who you are or what your soul society really is. But I know you're not my enemy. You fought to protect this place, same as me. So for that, thank you. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She was a lieutenant of the Gote 13. Duty was her reason for being. Thanks were an unnecessary complication. And yet, the simple gratitude from this strange, powerful man felt significant. I was merely fulfilling my mission, she said, her tone reverting to formal stiffness. The creature was a threat to the balance. Its existence was my responsibility. Right, Naruto said, a wry, tired smile touching his lips. Responsibility. He seemed to know the weight of that word better than anyone. He resumed walking, and the silence returned. But its quality had changed again. It was no longer tense, but thoughtful, the quiet of two minds working on the same impossible equation from different angles. By the time they reached the towering walls of Konoha, the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray. The guards at the gate, seasoned veterans who had seen everything, still stiff. Ned at the sight of Rukia in her strange black uniform, her presence an exotic and potentially threatening note in the familiar rhythm of their village. Naruto simply raised a hand, a gesture of weary authority. And they were allowed to pass without a word. The village was stirring, the first sounds of bakers and merchants beginning their day, a peaceful murmur that stood in stark contrast to the violence of their night. Naruto led her directly to the Hokage Tower, the red edifice that was the heart of the village. As they climbed the stairs, Rukia felt 100 pairs of eyes on her back. The shinobi of this village were preternaturally alert. She could feel their chakra signatures flaring with curiosity and suspicion as she passed. This place was a fortress, not just of walls, but of wills. The antechamber to the Hokage's office was empty, save for a single figure leaning against the far wall, arms crossed. Shikamaru Nara's lazy posture did nothing to hide the razor-sharp intelligence in his eyes as he assessed Rukia from head to toe. Naruto, Shikamaru said, his voice a low drawl. You're back. And you brought a friend. His gaze was heavy with meaning. She's not a friend, Naruto corrected, stopping before him. And she's not an enemy. It's complicated. We need to talk to Kakashi-sensei. Now, Shikamaru's eyes flickered from Naruto, to Rukia, and then to the faint smell of ozone and burnt wood that clung to them. He sighed, a long, put-upon sound. Troublesome. He's been waiting for you. Go on in. The Hokage's office was as she had imagined it from Naruto's description, a large, circular room dominated by a wooden desk and a panoramic view of the village, now bathed in the gentle light of sunrise. Kakashi Hatake, the sixth Hokage, sat behind the desk, his masked face betraying nothing. He looked up as they entered, his single visible eye taking in the scene with an unnerving calm. Naruto, he said, his voice mild. And you must be the source of the Anomalu's energy signature we've been tracking all night. A Shinigami, if my sources are correct. Rukia performed a slight, formal bow. Lieutenant Rukia Kuchiki, of the Gote 13. I am here on a mission from the Soul Society. Before the conversation could proceed, Naruto stepped forward. Kakashi-sensei, there was a monster. A hollow, she called it. But it was mixed with nature chakra. It ate ninjutsu. We had to. It was at that moment that reality itself seemed to scream. It started as a low hum, a vibration in the air that made the teeth ache. The ink pot on Kakashi's desk trembled, sending concentric ripples across its black surface. Then came the sound, a noise that was not a noise, like the universe being torn like silk. Outside the window, the sky above the center of the village began to distort. The blue warped, then split, revealing a slash of absolute, terrifying blackness. It wasn't a shadow or a cloud, it was a wound in the world. From the black wound, a path of shimmering, unstable energy unfolded, connecting the sky to the ground in the middle of Konoha's main plaza. It was a garganta, a portal between worlds, but it was crude, violent, and utterly contemptuous of the world it was violating. It was not a door being opened, it was a wall being sledgehammered through. Kakashi was on his feet in an instant, his mild demeanor gone, replaced by the lethal focus of a cage. Anbu, he barked, and 4 masked figures dropped from the ceiling, kneeling before him. Evacuate the plaza. Establish a perimeter. Do not engage unless fired upon. Go. The Anbu vanished in silent blurs of motion. Rukia stared at the garganta, her blood running cold. This was not a standard, approved passage. This was a forced entry. It was an act of aggression. And she knew, with a sinking certainty, who was on the other side. No, she whispered. Through the shimmering portal, 2 figures emerged. They walked with an unnerving grace, their forms resolving as they stepped from the chaotic RGY of their path into the clean air of Konoha. Both wore the pristine white haori of a Shinigami captain over their black shihakusho. The first was a woman, small and lithe, with dark hair tied in a complex braid. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes sharp and merciless. The second was a man, tall and impossibly regal. He wore his long, black hair held in place by intricate white kenseiken, symbols of his noble status. His handsome face was utterly impassive, his gaze sweeping over the village below with an air of detached, aristocratic judgment. Captain Sui Feng of the 2nd Division, Rukia breathed, recognizing the commander of the Onmitsukido, the stealth force. Then her eyes fell on the man, and her heart clenched with a familiar mixture of awe and fear. And brother, Rukia Kuchiki, captain of the 6th Division and head of the Kuchiki clan, had arrived. And he did not look pleased. The atmosphere in the Hokage's office was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. The 2 Shinigami captains stood before the Hokage's desk, their spiritual pressure rolling off them in palpable waves. Sui Feng's Ryutsu was a sharp, angry buzz, like a swarm of hornets trapped in a jar, making the air feel prickly and charged with static. Rukia's was a different beast entirely. It was a vast, silent weight, a crushing pressure that spoke of immense, ancient power held in perfect, chilling reserve. It was like standing at the foot of a glacier, feeling its sheer, overwhelming mass. Naruto stood beside Kakashi's desk, Shikamaru on the other side. Rukia stood slightly behind them, caught in the unenviable position between her duty to her world and her new, complicated reality in this one. I am Kakashi Hatake, Hokage of this village, Konohagakure, Kakashi said, his verses. Iceable eye crinkled into a shape that might have been a polite smile but held no warmth. He hadn't moved from behind his desk, a subtle assertion of his own authority in his own domain. While it is an interesting way to make an entrance. Welcome. May I ask the purpose of this unscheduled visit? Sui Feng sneered, her voice as sharp and clipped as her movements. We are not here for pleasantries, Hokage. We are here on the order of the Captain Commander to investigate a Class 1 threat to the balance of worlds. A threat my lieutenant, she shot a venomous glare at Rukia, has clearly failed to properly contain or report. My report was forthcoming, Captain, Rukia said, her voice tight but respectful. The situation is more complex than our initial analysis suggested. Silence, Lieutenant. Byakuya's voice cut through the room, cold and sharp as shattering ice. It was the first time he had spoken, and the sheer authority in his tone made everyone, even Naruto, pause. He turned his emotionless gray eyes on Kakashi. We have tracked the anomaly to this location. Specifically, to him. His gaze shifted, pinning Naruto in place. To the human boy, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto bristled at being called boy, but held his tongue, following Kakashi's earlier, subtle hand signal to let him lead. Naruto is a shinobi of this village and the hero of the Fourth Great War, Kakashi stated calmly. He is not a threat. He is a protector. Your internal conflicts are of no concern to us, Sui Feng countered immediately. His existence is leaking a conceptual poison into the dimensional fabric. We have detected a void. A point of utter null energy, centered on his spiritual signature. Such a thing cannot be allowed to exist. It is an affront to the cycle of reincarnation itself. He mused. Be taken back to the Soul Society for study and disassembly. Shikamaru let out a long, theatrical sigh. Disassembly. That's a troublesome choice of words, he drawled, stepping forward slightly. You barge into our village. Rip a hole in our sky, and then announce you're here to kidnap and dissect our strongest citizen. That's not a good start for a diplomatic relationship. This is not a negotiation, Byakuya said. His voice flat. This is a matter of cosmic law. The Soul Society is tasked with the maintenance of order across all worlds. Your world, and the lives within it, are but one small part of that balance. We will sacrifice a single piece to preserve the whole. The boy's power is an unknown variable. Unknown variables are threats. Threats are eliminated. The logic is simple. The only thing that's simple is your arrogance, Naruto finally bit out, unable to stay silent any longer. The pressure in the room spiked as his own vast chakra reserves flared in response to the captain's, Ryutsu. You talk about balance, but you don't know the first thing about me or this power. We just fought a monster born from the crap leaking between our worlds. Your lieutenant and I took it down together. That sounds more like a solution than a problem to me. You fought an unclassified aberration, Sui Feng retorted. That only proves that your presence here is a catalyst for chaos. You are a beacon for the very imbalance you claim to be fighting. So your solution is to execute the only person who can stop these things. Shikamaru countered, his lazy eyes now sharp as kunai. Pardon me for saying so. But for a group of supposedly ancient and wise soul reapers, that's a strategically idiotic plan. Sui Feng's hand flashed to the hilt of her Zanpakuto. You dare. Enough. Kakashi's voice cut in, still calm. But with an underlying edge of steel that made even the furious captain pause. He leaned forward, placing his hands on his desk. Let's be clear. Naruto Uzumaki is not going anywhere. He is under the protection of Konohagakure, and by extension, the entire allied shinobi forces. An aggressive act against him is an act of war against our nations. I assume even he esteemed Gote 13 would prefer to avoid a multi-dimensional war over a situation none of us fully understand. He let the threat hang in the air, a perfectly weighted counterbalance to Byakuya's pronouncements of cosmic law. He had shifted the argument from their ground to his. Byakuya's eyes narrowed fractionally. Your defiance is illogical. You are protecting a walking apocalypse out of sentiment. Such weakness is why mortals are unfit to govern the flow of souls. And your certainty is born of ignorance, Kakashi replied smoothly. You see a problem to be eliminated. We see a person to be helped. Perhaps if you spent less time making proclamations from on high and more time gathering actual intelligence, we could find a solution that doesn't involve bloodshed. The stalemate was absolute. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Naruto could feel Kurama stirring, the fox's chakra a hot, angry tide rising within him, wanting to lash out at the arrogant captain who looked at him like he was a bug to be squashed. But Naruto held it back. He had to be smarter now. He had to be better. He took a slow breath, letting it out. Then, he spoke, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the heavy tension. You think my power is just a mindless bomb waiting to go off. All eyes turned to him. Byakuya looked at him with cold disdain. You're wrong, Naruto said. He raised his right hand, the one scarred by frost. He didn't flare his chakra or release any killing intent. He simply focused. The sunlight streaming through the window blinds illuminated the countless tiny dust motes dancing in the air. Each one a miniature world swirling in the currents. Naruto focused his gaze on a single one, about 10 feet away, drifting lazily in a bar of light. He reached out with his will. Not with the overwhelming pull from the forest, but with the delicate, precise touch of a surgeon. He found the 0 point within him and drew out the smallest possible thread of its essence, a filament of absolute stillness. And extended it through the air. In the silent, watchful room, the impossible happened. The single, chosen dust mote stopped. It didn't slow down. It didn't waver. It simply ceased all motion. Hanging suspended in the beam of sunlight as if pinned to the world by an invisible needle. A microscopic, almost invisible aura of crystallized air formed around it. To the spiritually aware captains, it was even more profound. They could feel the reishi of that single speck of dust in the air around it wink out of existence, becoming a perfect, tiny point of void. Everyone stared. Sui Feng's jaw was tight. Her aggressive posture faltering for the first time. Shikamaru's eyes were wide, a flicker of genuine shock on his face. Even Kakashi watched with rapt attention. Byakuya's impassive mask finally showed a crack. His gray eyes widened by a fraction of a millimeter, the only sign of his utter astonishment. To control spiritual power at a macroscopic level was the mark of a captain. To control it at a microscopic level was the mark of a master. But to apply a conceptual power, a power of absolute nullification, to a single, drifting mote of dust, that was not mastery. That was a level of precision that should have been impossible. It was like performing brain surgery with a hurricane. Naruto held it for 5 seconds. Then, he released his focus. The thread of stillness retracted. The dust mote, its existence and motion restored, resumed its gentle, aimless fall, indistinguishable from the millions around it. He lowered his hand and looked directly at Byakuya. I am not a threat to be eliminated, Naruto said, his voice ringing with quiet, unshakable confidence. I am the only one who can control this. I am the solution. But I can't do it alone. I need to understand what's happening. And your lieutenant seems to be the only one who can even begin to explain the other half of this equation. So stop making threats, and start talking about how we can work together. The silence that followed was different. The raw aggression had been punctured, replaced by a grudging, stunned recalculation. Naruto hadn't met their power with power. He had met their arrogance with a display of control so profound it bordered on the sublime. Kakashi seized the opening. My offer stands, he said, his voice once again mild. Cooperation. Lieutenant Kuchiki H. As already proven, she can work with Naruto. Let her remain here, in Konoha, as an official liaison from the Soul Society. She can observe Naruto, study his power, and report her findings directly to you. We will offer her our full protection and assistance. In return, you will cease all hostilities and treat this as a joint investigation. Sui Feng looked ready to argue, but Byakuya raised a hand, silencing her. He stared at Naruto for a long, unblinking moment, his mind clearly processing the new data. The boy was not just a beast of raw power. He possessed a will and a degree of control that was, in its own way, as formidable as any captain's bankai. The proposal is less than ideal, Byakuya said finally, his voice still cold, but without the dismissive edge from before. However, it is preferable to a protracted, pointless conflict. The risk of this power running rampant remains unacceptable. A liaison is a logical first step. He turned his gaze to Rukia. Lieutenant, you will remain in this village. You will monitor the anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki. You will analyze the nature of his power and its effect on the dimensional barrier. You will report daily. You will be under his direct supervision, and therefore, he is responsible for your safety and conduct. Is that understood? The implication was clear. If anything happened to Rukia, Naruto would be held personally responsible. It was a leash, elegantly applied. Yes, brother, Captain, Rukia corrected herself, bowing her head. This is an acceptable compromise, Kakashi said, sealing the deal. For now. Byakuya gave a single, curt nod. He turned to leave, his white houri sweeping behind him. Sui Feng. We are departing. The fiery captain shot one last murderous look at Shikamaru, then turned and followed her fellow captain without a word. They walked from the office, their footsteps silent. A few moments later, the shinobi in the village could feel the oppressive spiritual pressure vanish as the two captains stepped back through their violent gate, which then sealed itself with another sickening, tearing sound, leaving behind a sky that was once again whole and blue. The tension in the office finally broke. Shikamaru let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. Man, what a drag. I think I need a nap for a week. Kakashi leaned back in his chair, his posture slumping with relief. He looked at Naruto, and his visible eye was filled with something beyond pride. It was awe. That was a risky move, Naruto. But that was brilliantly done. You didn't act like a general. You acted like a cage. Naruto just shrugged, the adrenaline leaving him feeling drained. I just told him the truth. He looked at Rukia, who was still standing stiffly, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. So, I guess you're stuck with me. Huh. Rukia met his gaze, 1,000 new questions swirling in her mind. It would appear so. Naruto Uzumaki. Later, as Rukia Kuchiki stood within the chaotic vortex of the Dongai. Returning to the Soul Society, Rukia's voice echoed in his mind, a private communication sent via a Kido link just before his departure. Brother, is this wise? Leaving me here? He did not reply immediately. His mind replaying the image of the frozen dust mote. He had felt the power that Naruto had used. He had analyzed it with the senses of a master. It was not like the Ryutsu of a Shinigami or the Reishi of a Quincy. It wasn't large or small in the traditional sense. A vast Ryutsu was like an ocean, immense, powerful, but ultimately measurable. Naruto's power was different. The boy's spiritual pressure, he finally sent back, his thought voice as impassive as his face. Large is the incorrect term to describe it. It is not an ocean. He paused, searching for the right word. A word to describe a power that did not expand, but compressed. A power that did not overwhelm, but simply was. It is a singularity. It is not wide. It is infinitely dense. And in the silence of the void between worlds, Rukia Kuchiki, for the first time in centuries, felt the cold touch of a truly profound, truly cosmic fear. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sound of Shattering Ice. Tenten had always believed in the elegant truth of steel. A well-forged blade had a voice, a story told in the fold of its metal and the keenness of its edge. A perfectly balanced kunai was a poem of aerodynamics. A complex sealing scroll was a symphony of intent, each brushstroke a note in a composition of devastating power. Her world was one of tangible, measurable forces. Chakra could be molded, nature could be transformed. And a weapon's efficacy could be proven against a training post. It was a world of profound, beautiful logic. And then the Shinigami had arrived, and the clean, beautiful logic of her world had been thrown into a state of exhilarating chaos. Her workshop, a large, airy space in the heart of Konoha's newly expanded Research and Development Division, was her sanctuary. The air smelled of quenching oil, whetstone dust, and the sharp, clean scent of ink. Racks of gleaming weaponry lined one wall, from standard issue kunai to her own exotic prototypes. Another wall was covered in scrolls. Some detailing ancient weapon schematics, others covered in the intricate, spiraling mathematics of Fuinjutsu. This was where she had been spending most of her time since the war. Not just running the family weapon shop, but acting as a chief consultant for Konoha's entire shinobi arsenal. The world was at peace, but peace, as any good strategist knew, was simply the state of sharpening your blades for the next war. The rumors had reached her workshop almost immediately. A woman in black robes who carried a sword of impossible make. A diplomatic incident that had nearly leveled the plaza. And at the center of it all, Naruto Uzumaki, who was now under constant, if subtle, Anbu surveillance. But it was the whispers from the decryption core that had truly snagged Tenten's professional curiosity. They spoke of an energy that wasn't chakra, of a sword that was alive, of spells cast with words instead of hand signs. It was an entirely new school of martial philosophy, and Tenten, a scholar of combat in all its forms, found the allure irresistible. So she had sent a message. Not to the Hokage, which would have involved endless paperwork, but directly to Naruto. It was a simple, professional request. I need to see the sword. 2 days later, they stood in her workshop. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes. that Naruto now seemed to watch with a quiet, unnerving intensity. He stood near the door, a silent, watchful guardian, while Rukia Kuchiki stood in the center of the room, her slight frame dwarfed by the forge and anvils. She had agreed to the meeting with a hesitant curiosity of her own. It is called a Zanpakuto, Rukia explained, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. She held the weapon in both hands. Its simple katana form belying the complexity Tenten could already sense. It is the primary weapon of a Shinigami. The sword is a reflection of our own soul. It has a name, and it has a spirit. Tenten's eyes, sharp and analytical, devoured every detail. A spirit, she repeated, her voice alight with a craftsman's passion. So it's a form of summoning contract, bound to the metal itself. The blade acts as a conduit. Quote. In a way, Rukia conceded, seemingly impressed by the intuitive leap. The base form is called an asachi. It is a nameless blade, a blank slate. Over years of imprinting our soul upon it, it develops its unique form and abilities. Fascinating, Tenten breathed, circling Rukia slowly, her gaze locked on the pristine white hilt and elegant cross guard of the sheathed blade. So the weapon grows with the user. It's not a static tool, but a partner. The metallurgy must be impossible. To be able to channel a soul's energy without degrading, what is it forged from? Rukia looked momentarily stumped. I do not know the specifics of its forging. It is simply how they have always been made. Right, tradition, Tenten nodded, a familiar obstacle in her own world. Mind if I? She gestured, not to touch the blade, but to a large, low table covered in a massive, unrolled scroll. The scroll was a complex diagnostic tool of her own design, covered in thousands of tiny seals. Each one calibrated to react to a different type of chakra signature or elemental affinity. Rukia, after a glance at Naruto who gave a slight nod, placed the sheathed Zanpakuto on the center of the scroll. Instantly, several of the seals around it began to glow with a soft, white light. Incredible, Tenten murmured, kneeling beside the table. It's not emitting chakra. Not a single trace. But it's radiating something. A spiritual energy, pure and incredibly dense. It's so different from sage energy. Sage energy is a part of the world. This feels like it's from somewhere else entirely. She pointed to a spiraling seal near the hilt. This seal detects sentient energy, the kind found in summoning animals. And it's glowing brighter than it did when I tested it on Gamabunta. There really is a consciousness in there. She looked up at Rukia, her eyes shining. Show me, please. Rukia nodded. She picked up the sword and moved to the open space in the center of the workshop. This is its sealed state. To release its true power, we use a command phrase. This is called Shikai. She held the blade out before her, its tip pointed at the floor. A quiet, powerful dignity settled over her. Dance, she commanded, her voice ringing with a strange harmony. Soda no Shirayuki. A wave of cold, clean air washed through the workshop. The blade, which had been a simple katana, transformed. It became a pure, immaculate white, from the hilt to the pommel. The cross guard became a hollowed-out snowflake. A long, white ribbon spooled from the pommel, elegant and ethereal. The blade itself seemed to radiate a cold that was nothing like Naruto's empty chill. This was the cold of a crisp winter morning, clean and sharp and alive. Tenten stared, utterly captivated. It changed shape. The metal itself reformed. That's not a genjutsu illusion. That's transmutation. The command phrase, it's like a trigger seal. A verbal key that unlocks a fuinjutsu formula woven into the blade's very essence. I have never thought of it that way, Rukia admitted, looking at her transformed blade with new eyes. To us, it is a conversation with our soul. It's the same thing, Tenten said, her excitement growing. Fuinjutsu is the art of writing your will into the world. You've just written your will into your own soul and bound it to a tool. This is the most elegant piece of weapon design I have ever seen in my life. She turned to Naruto, who had been watching the exchange with a quiet, focused interest. And your power. It's cold, like this. But it feels different. Wrong. The excitement in the room cooled slightly. Naruto's expression became guarded. It is different, he said. Hers is ice. Mine is nothing. Let's quantify that, Tenten said, her mind already racing. Rukia, if you would. She gestured to a training dummy in the corner, a sturdy creation of wood and reinforced steel. Rukia nodded. My first dance. Tsukashiro. She gracefully drew a circle with Soda no Shirayuki. A pillar of shimmering ice erupted from the floor, encasing the training dummy in a perfect, frozen prison. The air around the dummy grew cold, but it was a measurable, natural cold. Tenten held up a device. A modified thermometer that read chakra and temperature. -40 degrees Celsius at the point of contact. A powerful Hyoten jutsu, but still within the realm of known elemental manipulation. She then turned to Naruto. Your turn. Don't do what you did in the forest. Just a little. The smallest amount you can manage. Aim for the dummy. Naruto hesitated, his gaze flickering towards his own hands. It's not a good idea. I have containment seals prepared, Tenten said, pointing to the arrays painted on the workshop floor. And I need the data. We can't help you if we don't understand what we're fighting. Naruto looked at Rukia, who gave him a nod of encouragement. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his eyes closing in concentration. He raised his hand, aiming at the second training dummy. He didn't try to release a wave. He just tried to create that tiny point of stillness he had shown the captains, and project it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the chakra thermometer in Tenten's hand went haywire. The needle didn't drop, it shattered. A perfect, 2-inch circle of something appeared on the dummy's chest. It wasn't frost. It wasn't ice. It looked like a patch of the night sky had been inlaid into the wood, a spot of perfect, light-devouring black. There was no sound, no vapor, no sign of energy transfer. Tenten took a cautious step closer. The air near the dummy wasn't just cold, it was inert. It was like breathing sterile, recycled air. She reached out with a long metal rod and gently poked the black circle. The instant the tip of the rod touched the circle, the first inch of it simply ceased to be. It didn't shatter or melt. It was just gone. Tenten snatched the rod back, her eyes wide. By the sage, she whispered. It's not freezing it. It's erasing it. Annihilating the matter at a molecular level. She looked at Naruto with a mixture of terror and absolute, scientific fascination. This isn't an elemental Kekkei Genkai. This is something else entirely. A dojutsu, maybe. Like the Kamui, but instead of teleporting matter, it deletes it from existence by halting all subatomic motion. A dojutsu? Naruto asked, his own eyes wide. He hadn't known it was that absolute. It's the only theory that fits, Tenten said, already moving to a large chalkboard, grabbing a piece of charcoal. Look, if matter is energy, and energy is motion, vibrating particles, spinning electrons, then what happens when you introduce a state of absolute, perfect stillness? A true 0 point. The energy state ceases to be. The matter unexists. You're not creating cold. You're imposing a state of non-existence on a localized area. She began sketching out complex equations, fuinjutsu arrays mixed with scientific formulas. Rukia watched her, then looked at Naruto. She understands it. She's Tenten, Naruto said with a shrug, a flicker of pride in his voice. This is what she does. For the next several hours, the three of them worked. Rukia explained the concepts of reishi and the soul, and Tenten translated them into the language of chakra and physical energy. Naruto described what he felt when he used the power, the pull, the void. The feeling of touching nothingness. Tenten absorbed it all, her mind a whirlwind of creation. She filled the chalkboard with theories, diagrams, and potential solutions. The problem is control, she finally said, wiping charcoal dust from her hands. It's a formless, conceptual power. It's like trying to hold water in your fist. You need a container, a regulator. She walked over to a workbench and unrolled a new schematic. It was a drawing of an armored gauntlet, sleek and black, covered in intricate, spiraling seals. I've been working on this idea since I heard what happened, she explained. This isn't standard armor. It's forged from chakra-conductive metal, interwoven with seals designed for suppression and regulation. This main seal here, she pointed to a large spiral on the back of the hand, is designed to act as a heat sink, but for your power. It will absorb the overflow, the energy bleed. These smaller seals along the fingers are regulators. In theory, they should allow you to shape the output, to give that formless void a defined edge. Naruto stared at the drawing, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. You think that will work? The theory is sound, Tenten said with a confident grin. But I'll need a few days to forge the prototype. And I'll need your help. She looked at Rukia. Your Zanpakuto. It radiates a pure, controlled cold. I need to attune the final seals to that frequency, to give them a baseline to work from. And you, she turned to Naruto, will need to be here to provide small, controlled bursts of your power to calibrate the main absorption matrix. It'll be dangerous. We'll do it, Naruto said, his voice firm. For the first time in months, he felt like he wasn't fighting a ghost. He had allies. He had a plan. That evening, the R&D division was quiet, the sounds of forging and invention replaced by the gentle hum of the city settling down for the night. Naruto's apartment felt strangely large with Rukia there. As part of her liaison duties, she had been given quarters in the Anbu barracks, but she spent most of her time with Naruto, observing and documenting. Tonight was documentation night. She sat at his small kitchen table, a stack of paper and an ink brush before her. She was trying to create a visual record of the Chakra Hollow for her report to the Soul Society, and she was failing spectacularly. Naruto leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an amused smirk. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her tongue sticking out slightly from the corner of her mouth. The paper in front of her was covered in things. One looked like a very angry rabbit with thorns. Another resembled a fluffy bear wearing a scary mask. None of them looked remotely like the 10-foot-tall monstrosity they had fought. Having trouble? He asked, his voice laced with laughter. Rukia looked up, a faint pink blush coloring her cheeks. She quickly covered the drawing with her hands. It is a stylistic representation, she declared haughtily. It captures the essence of the creature. The essence of a fluffy bunny, maybe, Naruto chuckled, walking over. He peered over her shoulder at the drawings. Wow, that's really bad. I am a Shinigami, not an artist. She retorted, though the protest was half-hearted. My skills lie in swordsmanship and Kido, not this. Naruto grinned. Here, let me. He pulled up a chair beside her, took a fresh sheet of paper, and picked up the brush. He swirled it in the ink, his hand moving with a surprising, practiced grace. Okay, so it was tall, right? And its arms were like twisted tree roots. As he spoke, he began to draw. His strokes were quick, confident, and startlingly precise. The grotesque form of the chakra hollow began to take shape on the paper, the thorny vines, the bark-like hide. The gaping hole in its chest all rendered with chilling accuracy. He wasn't just a good artist, he was a natural. Rukia watched, her initial embarrassment fading into genuine surprise. How do you, quote, learned a thing or two from Sai, he said, not looking up. And I used to get in trouble for drawing graffiti all over the village. Had to get good to do it fast. He sketched in the final details. The corrupted mask, the menacing posture. The creature on the page was terrifyingly alive. There. Is that closer to its fluffy essence? She looked from his drawing to her own rabbit monster and couldn't help but let out a small laugh. It is adequate. They sat there for a while, the silence comfortable. Naruto began sketching on a spare piece of paper, drawing a goofy-looking toad with a pipe. Rukia watched him, a small, genuine smile on her face. You are a person of many surprises, Naruto Uzumaki, she said softly. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers across the small table. The humor faded, replaced by something quieter, more direct. You too, Rukia Kuchiki. They talked for hours after that. He told her stories of Team 7, of his ridiculous, lifelong rivalry with Sasuke and his attempts to keep up with Sakura. He even told her about Jiraiya, the pervy sage who had been like a grandfather to him. Rukia, in turn, spoke of her life in the Seraite. Of her stern but protective brother, of her boisterous, loyal friends in the 13th Division, and of a certain orange-haired substitute Shinigami who had also turned her world upside down. They found a strange, unexpected common ground. Two people from different universes who had somehow been shaped by the same forces of friendship, loyalty, and the unending burden of protecting others. 3 days later, they stood in a secure training ground, a reinforced bunker deep beneath the R&D division. Tenten held up the finished product. The gauntlet was a masterpiece of black, segmented metal, etched with seals that seemed to hum with contained power. It looked sleek, deadly, and beautiful. Prototype complete, she announced, a proud grin on her face. It's calibrated. Theoretically, it should give you a measure of control you haven't had before. Put it on. Naruto took the gauntlet, the metal cool and heavy in his hand. He slipped it onto his right arm. It was a perfect fit, say. Ling over his hand and forearm as if it had been forged for him. He flexed his fingers, the segments moving silently. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. Here goes nothing. He stood in the center of the room. Tenten and Rukia watched from behind a reinforced observation window. Naruto focused, reaching for the 0 point. He braced himself for the usual, uncontrolled pull. But this time, something was different. As the power began to flow, the seals on the gauntlet lit up, glowing with a soft, blue light. He felt the familiar, terrifying void, but it wasn't spilling out of him. It was being channeled. The gauntlet felt like a dam, holding back a flood and allowing only a single, controlled stream to pass through. He could feel the main seal on the back of his hand growing cold, absorbing the excess energy. He pointed a single, gauntleted finger at a steel target on the far wall. Focusing his will, he released a tiny amount of the power. A thin, perfectly straight beam of blackness, no wider than a needle, shot from his fingertip. It struck the target, and a hole the exact same size appeared in the half-inch thick steel plate. No sound, no impact, just a perfect, clean erasure. Naruto stared at his hand. Then at the hole, then back at his hand. He opened and closed his fist. He could feel the power, quiescent now, contained within the gauntlet, waiting for his command. He let out a shaky breath and then broke into a wide, brilliant grin, the first genuine, full-faced smile they had seen from him in months. It worked, he breathed. Tenten. It worked. Behind the glass, Tenten and Rukia were smiling too. A shared look of pride and profound relief passing between them. They had done it. They had forged the first key to controlling the abyss. Later that evening, the trio emerged from the R&D building. Tired but triumphant, they walked through the village streets, bathed in the warm glow of sunset, their conversation animated and filled with plans for further tests and refinements. Their laughter was a bright, clear sound in the evening air, the easy camaraderie of a team that had just achieved the impossible. From the shadows of a rooftop across the street, another figure watched them. Hinata Hyuga stood perfectly still, her pale lavender eyes fixed on the scene below. She saw the way Naruto looked at his two companions, the easy trust, the shared excitement. She saw the way Tenten animatedly explained a concept with her hands, and the way Rukia listened, a small smile on her lips. They looked like a cohesive unit. They looked like they belonged together. A trio forged in a fire she hadn't been a part of. A gentle breeze stirred her long, dark hair. Her expression was perfectly calm, her posture poised and graceful as always. But in the depths of her Byakugan lineage eyes, a complex, unreadable emotion swirled. A quiet sorrow, a flicker of steely resolve, and the dawning, painful understanding that Naruto Uzumaki was walking a path that was eating him further and further from the one she had always hoped they would walk together. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Resonance of Blood. Peace in Konoha was a fragile, beautiful thing, a delicate pie. ECE of porcelain purchased with a mountain of blood and bones. Naruto had learned to cherish the quiet moments it afforded him. The laughter of children in the street, the familiar taste of Chuki's ramen. The comfortable exhaustion after a day of training the next generation. For a week after the successful test of Tenten's gauntlet, he had allowed himself to indulge in that peace, to believe, however naively, that he had finally put a leash on the winter in his soul. The 0 point was still a part of him, a sleeping leviathan, but the sleek, black metal on his arm was a constant, reassuring weight, a symbol of control. The illusion of peace shattered on a Tuesday morning, under a sky of brilliant, cloudless blue. It did not arrive with the force of a dimensional gate ripping open, but with the quiet whisper of a hawk's wings. It was not a standard Konoha messenger bird. This one was older, leaner, its feathers the color of rust, its eyes holding an ancient, wild intelligence. It landed on Naruto's apartment windowsill, ignoring the offering of seeds he extended, and presented its leg. Tied there was not a standard scroll case, but a small, tightly rolled parchment sealed with a wax stamp bearing a familiar, potent symbol. The swirling spiral of the Uzumaki clan. Rukia, who was sitting at his table meticulously cataloging the different forms of Kido for a cross-referencing project with Tenten, looked up. Her curiosity piqued. An official summons. No, Naruto said, his voice tight as he carefully unrolled the parchment. This is family business. The message was short, written in a cramped, urgent script. It was a cipher, one he and Karen had devised years ago, a simple code based on their shared Uzumaki heritage. It spoke not of attacks or enemies, but of sickness and discord. The old blood sings a fevered song. The whirlpool turns the wrong way. The silence is not empty, it screams. Come to the heart of the spiral. The ghosts are waking up. His blood ran cold. The old blood was their term for the residual chakra that saturated Uzushiogakure, the ancestral home of their clan. The whirlpool was the great vortex seal, the masterpiece of Fuinjutsu that had protected the island. And, screaming silence, that sounded terrifyingly close to a description of his own power. I have to go, he said, already moving, his mind snapping into mission mode. He strapped the gauntlet onto his right arm. The black metal clicking into place. Go where? Rukia asked, standing up. Your duties require you to remain in Konoha for observation. This is different, Naruto said, his face grim. This is about my clan. My family. The place my parents came from. He met her gaze, his blue eyes intense. Karen needs me. Karen. The name was unfamiliar to her. An Uzumaki. Like me. She's a censor. One of the best in the world. If she says something is wrong at the ruins, then something is catastrophically wrong. Rukia processed this, her mind connecting the dots. His clan. An island of ruins. A powerful censor. This was not a random village matter. It was directly tied to his lineage, the very source of his immense chakra. The 0 point was interwoven with his heritage. Therefore, this was part of her mission. I am coming with you, she stated. It was not a request. Captain Kuchiki's orders were to monitor you and any phenomena related to your power. A disturbance at the home of your ancestors qualifies. Naruto paused, then gave a curt nod. Fine. But be ready. The place we're going. It's not a friendly place. It's a graveyard. The journey to He Land of Whirlpools was a somber affair. After a tense but necessary briefing with Kakashi, who had reluctantly sanctioned the mission under the condition they maintain regular contact, they had chartered a small, fast vessel from the Land of Fire's coast. The sea began calm, a vast expanse of sapphire under a benevolent sun. Naruto stood at the prow of the boat, the salt spray misting his face, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Your clan? They were destroyed. Rukia asked softly, joining him at the railing. She was dressed in her gigai, a simple civilian outfit that did little to hide the trained alertness in her posture. Naruto didn't look at her, his eyes lost in the distance. Yeah, a long time ago. Before I was born. The Uzumaki clan was famous for two things: our massive life force and our mastery of Fuinjutsu. Sealing Jutsu. We were allies with Konoha. The first Hokage's wife, Mito Uzumaki, was the first Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. She was from my clan. He unconsciously touched his own stomach, where his seal lay. Our sealing arts were too powerful. The other nations, they grew to fear us. So they banded together during one of the Great Wars, and wiped Uzushio off the map. Konoha got there too late to help. The survivors scattered across the world. He fell silent, the roar of the boat's engine filling the void. Rukia listened, her heart aching with a familiar sorrow. The story was different, but the theme was the same as the Quincy massacre she had learned about, a people destroyed out of fear of their power. It was the eternal, tragic song of the universe. This Karen, she prompted gently. She is one of the survivors. A descendant, like me, he confirmed. We found each other during the war. She's intense. But she's family. For the past year, she's been trying to gather what's left of our clan, to find a new home for them. She set up a base camp near Uzushio, to try and reclaim our history. He finally turned to look at her, a profound sadness in his eyes. I'm the last Uzumaki of the main Konoha line. She's one of the few others who carry the name. I owe it to her, and to my mother, to go. As they sailed further, the sky began to change. The brilliant blue bled into a bruised, sullen gray. The sea grew restless, its surface churning, whitecaps appearing on the waves. The air grew heavy and damp, and a low, persistent wind began to howl, a mournful sound that seemed to rise from the depths of the ocean itself. They were approaching the land of whirlpools, a place where the sea and sky were locked in a perpetual, violent dance. By the time the island appeared on the horizon, it was as a jagged black tooth against a roiling, storm-dark sky. Even from miles away, Rukia could feel it. The vibrant, chaotic chakra of the mainland was gone, replaced by something ancient, powerful, and deeply wounded. The air itself felt thick with sorrow and rage. It was a place saturated with the spiritual residue of a violent, unjust death. From a high cliff overlooking the turbulent bay, Karen Uzumaki watched the small boat battling its way through the treacherous currents. Her crimson hair, a fiery banner against the gray landscape, was whipped across her face by the gale-force winds. She was not alone. Behind her stood three other figures, men and women with the same telltale red hair, their faces grim and weathered. They were the last remnants of a once proud clan, clinging to the edge of their shattered homeland. Karen pushed her glasses up her nose, her eyes closed. She wasn't watching with her sight, but with her senses. She was a vortex of sensory information, a living nexus for the flow of chakra. She could feel the familiar, sun-bright signature of Naruto's chakra, a beacon of warmth in the cold, desolate energy of the island. But as she focused, she felt the other thing, the thing that had been growing in him, the thing that had drawn her here in the first place. It was a hole in the world. A point of utter, terrifying silence in the symphony of life she perceived every second of every day. Where Naruto's life force should have been a roaring bonfire, there was now a black hole at its center, a vortex that drank light and sound and life. It was so profoundly wrong it made her feel nauseous. She could also feel the other signature with him, a cool, orderly, and utterly alien energy. It was calm and structured, like a perfectly formed crystal. A stark contrast to the raw, wild chakra of their world. The Shinigami. The boat finally made landfall on a narrow, rocky beach. Naruto leapt from the vessel, his sandals crunching on the black sand. Followed closely by Rukia, he looked up at the cliffs, his eyes finding Karen's instantly. Karen. He yelled over the roar of the wind and waves. She led her small party down a treacherous, winding path to meet them. When she finally stood before him, the first thing she did was punch him squarely in the arm. Baka Naruto. She snapped, her voice sharp but her eyes filled with a desperate relief. You took your sweet time. I sent that hawk 2 days ago. It's good to see you too, Karen, Naruto grumbled, rubbing his arm. This is Rukia Kuchiki. She's a consultant. Karen's sharp gaze fell on Rukia, assessing her from head to toe. She felt the calm, alien energy and gave a slight, grudging nod. Then her attention snapped back to Naruto's right arm, to the black gauntlet. Her sensory perception focused on it, and her eyes widened behind her glasses. Seals. Complex regulation and suppression arrays. Who built this for you? It's brilliant work. It's the only thing keeping that void in you from swallowing you whole. A friend, Naruto said simply. Tenten. Now, tell me what's going on. Your message. What did you mean? The whirlpool is turning the wrong way. It's not a metaphor, Karen said, her expression turning grim. She gestured for them to follow her back up the cliff path. The great vortex seal at the heart of the island is failing. But it's not just decaying. Something is pushing against it, something from the other side. A few weeks ago, the residual chakra of the island, the echoes of our ancestors, began to curdle. They became twisted, aggressive. Then they started appearing. She pointed towards the ruins that crested the cliff. Jagged, salt-blasted towers clawed at the stormy sky, their stones covered in cracked, faded Uzumaki spirals. And drifting between the broken walls were shimmering, translucent figures. Some looked like shinobi, clad in the ghostly armor of a bygone era. Others were more monstrous, their forms twisted and bestial, with crude, broken masks on their faces and gaping holes in their chests. Echoes of the dead, mixed with hollows. Rukia breathed, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her zanpakuto. The rift. It must be anchored or bleeding through here. Exactly, Karen said, her gaze fixed on the spectral figures. This island is a nexus of fuinjutsu, a place where the veil between worlds was always thin. Now, With the rift you two seem to have brought with you, it's tearing open. The sorrow of our clan's death is acting as a beacon, drawing the hollows in, and the hollows, see. Erupting influence is turning our ancestral spirits into monsters. I've been trying to reinforce the outer seals, but it's like trying to patch a dam with paper. Something is actively working against me from the inside. They stood at the edge of the ruins, a wind-swept precipice overlooking a city of ghosts. The howling of the wind was joined by a low, dissonant chorus of whispers, the voices of the dead filled with pain and confusion. Someone is in there, Naruto said, his gaze hard. That's what you're saying. Someone is doing this deliberately. I can feel their chakra signature, Karen confirmed. It's faint, slippery, and it feels parasitic. They're latching onto the ancient seals, draining them, twisting their purpose. I tried to go in deeper, but the traps are becoming unstable. Seals that were meant for defense are now lashing out at anything, and the spirits in the central complex are stronger. So we go in, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're the censor, you lead the way. Rukia, you're the expert on these hollow things. I'll handle the heavy lifting. He looked at the haunted city of his ancestors, his expression a mixture of sorrow and grim determination. No one else is going to desecrate my home. The ruins of Uzushiogakure were a labyrinth of sorrow. Every broken stone seemed to cry out with the memory of betrayal. As they moved deeper, the air grew colder, thick with a tangible sense of menace. Karen walked at the front, her eyes closed, one hand pressed to her temple. Stop, she commanded suddenly. They froze in a collapsed courtyard. There's a pressure-activated paralysis seal right in front of you, Naruto. It's old, but it's been corrupted. I can feel hollow energy woven into the formula. It won't just paralyze you anymore, it'll try to eat your soul. Naruto looked at the ground, seeing nothing but cracked flagstones. How do we get past? We don't, Rukia said, stepping forward. She began to chant, her hands forming a complex gesture. Bakudo number 30. Shitotsu Sanshiro. Beak stab triple flash. 3 triangular constructs of golden light shot from her fingers, impacting the ground in front of Naruto. They did not explode. Instead, they interlocked, forming a larger pyramid of light that completely encased the area of the trap. A low, hungry hiss came from the ground as the corrupted seal tried to attack the Keto barrier. Then faded into silence. It is contained. We can go around. They continued, their teamwork falling into a natural, unspoken rhythm. Karen would sense the Fuinjutsu traps and the spiritual disturbances. Rukia would use her Keto to contain or neutralize the spectral threats. And Naruto acted as their shield, his immense chakra reserves a bulwark against the oppressive atmosphere. His gauntlet-clad hand ready to deal with any physical threats that broke through. They encountered a group of the spectral echoes in a ruined armory. The spirits of Uzumaki warriors, their eyes glowing with a malevolent white light, charged them with ghostly katanas. Rukia's blade passed right through them. They are not fully corporeal. My Zanpakuto cannot harm them. They're anchored to the rift's energy. Karen yelled, ducking under a spectral sword. You have to sever the connection. Naruto stepped forward, the gauntlet on his arm humming softly. He didn't want to erase them. They were his kin, however twisted they had become. He focused, channeling the smallest, most precise amount of his power. He didn't create a beam of nothingness. Instead, he released a gentle, expanding pulse of absolute stillness from his hand. The pulse wasn't destructive. It was a wave of pure order. As the wave passed over the ghostly shinobi, the malevolent light in their eyes flickered and died. The corrupting hollow energy that had been clinging to them was negated, unmade. Their forms wavered, becoming clearer, the rage on their faces softening into confusion, then sorrow, and finally, peace. They turned, gave Naruto a silent, grateful bow, and faded away into motes of clean, white light. Karen stared, her sensory perception reeling from what she had just witnessed. You didn't destroy them, she whispered. Her voice filled with awe. You purified them. You used the power of absolute stillness, to bring them peace. It's the first time I've been able to use it like that, Naruto admitted, looking at his gauntlet. He was not just controlling the void, he was learning its language. Led by Karen's unerring senses, they finally reached the heart of the island, a vast, subterranean chamber that had once housed the Great Vortex Seal. The chamber was a wreck. The massive, circular seal array that covered the entire floor was cracked, its intricate lines glowing with a sick, pulsing purple light instead of the healthy blue of Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. And crawling over the array were smaller, disgusting-looking seals, like leeches of ink, siphoning the power of the Great Seal. In the center of the chamber, a group of 5 figures in the dark, water-patterned robes of Kurigakure worked, channeling their chakra into the parasitic seals. One of them turned as the trio entered, his face covered in a porcelain mask painted with a cruel, snarling wave. The Jinchuriki, the masked shinobi hissed, his voice distorted. And the Uzumaki bitch. You are too late. The ritual is nearly complete. Who are you? Naruto demanded, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. The masked man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. We are the ghosts you forgot. The sealing core of Kurigakure, destroyed and disgraced by your clan in the Second War. We have returned to reclaim our power, using your own arts against you. He gestured around the chamber. Your Great Vortex Seal was a defensive masterpiece. But with a few modifications, it can be turned into a weapon. A cannon that will channel the raw, endless energy of this rift, and allow us to wipe our enemies from the face of the earth. You're insane, Karen yelled. Activating the seal without a proper catalyst will tear this entire island apart. The masked shinobi's head tilted. Oh, but we were counting on a catalyst arriving. He held up a half-burned scroll. Its edges still smoking. We found your ancestors' contingency plans. The Great Vortex Seal, in times of great crisis, could be hypercharged. But it requires a sacrifice. A key to turn the lock. He read from the scroll, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. The seal will only accept a catalyst of the royal bloodline, one who carries the Uzumaki spiral not just in name, but in soul. One who holds the power of creation. He paused, looking at Naruto's golden chakra that began to flare, and the power of absolute stillness. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy as a tombstone. Rukia and Karen stared at Naruto, a horrified understanding dawning on their faces. The scroll wasn't just describing a generic Uzumaki. That specific, impossible combination, see. Reation and stillness. Sage of 6 paths chakra and the 0 point. The enemy didn't just want to use the seal. They needed Naruto Uzumaki, body and soul, to be the living, screaming heart of their new world-breaking weapon. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A game of Go in the moonlight. The retreat from Uzushiogakure was a grim, silent affair. The 5 Kurigakure shinobi, fanatics calling themselves the Purifiers of the Mist, had not been an overwhelming physical challenge. Confronted by the combined might of a sage-powered Jinchuriki, a Shinigami lieutenant, and a master Uzumaki censor, their gambit had crumbled. The fight was short and brutal, ending not with their capture, but with their self-destruction, a final, spiteful act of sealing jutsu that turned their bodies to ash and nearly took a chunk of the collapsing chamber with them. They had failed in their grand design, but they had succeeded in leaving a venomous parting gift, the truth. The knowledge of what they had intended for him sat like a shard of ice in Naruto's gut. To be a key, a sacrifice, to have his very existence, the unique fusion of his heritage and his strange, terrible new power, targeted as a component for a pawn, it was a violation far more profound than any physical attack. It recontextualized the threat from an external problem to an existential one. He wasn't just a target, he was the prize. They had spent the rest of the day at the ruins with Karen's small team, doing what they could. With Karen's guidance, Naruto and Rukia had worked to stabilize the Great Vortex Seal. It was a painstaking process. Naruto would use the gauntlet to project precise fields of stillness, halting the decay of the ancient Fuinjutsu arrays, while Rukia used restorative Kido to cleanse the lingering spiritual corruption. They were a remarkably effective team, his absolute control and her spiritual arts meshing as if designed for the purpose. By the time they departed, the island was still a ruin, but it was a quiet one. The screaming silence had been replaced by a deep, sleeping peace. The ghosts were no longer waking. They were finally at rest. A secure communication from Kakashi had rerouted them. Not back to Konoha, where Naruto's presence as a newly identified high-value target would endanger the populace, but to a waypoint. A secure location designated for high-level, clandestine meetings, the NK. Known as the moon's reflection, in the land of hot water, a mountainous region famed for its secluded hot springs and its strict neutrality. The inn was a masterpiece of quiet elegance, nestled in A.H. Iden Valley, accessible only by a single, heavily guarded mountain pass. It was a place where Cage could meet their rivals without fear of assassination, a sanctuary of polished dark wood, paper shoji screens, and meticulously raked gravel gardens. The air was thick with the clean scent of cedar and the faint, sulfuric perfume of the geothermal springs, a calming aroma that did absolutely nothing to soothe the coiled tension in Naruto's shoulders. They were given a private wing of the inn. Karen, ever the vigilant censor, immediately began placing her own perimeter of sensory seals around their rooms. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Rukia, ever the soldier, took to analyzing the inn's layout, noting escape routes and defensive positions. Naruto found himself standing on an Engawa, a Odin veranda overlooking a serene koi pond. The moon, full and impossibly bright, was reflected perfectly on the water's still, black surface. A shishi adoshi, a bamboo fountain, clacked rhythmically in the background. A sound designed for meditation, for peace. He felt none of it. He felt like a target in a gilded cage. You should try the baths, Rukia said, her voice soft as she came to stand beside him. The minerals in the water are said to have restorative properties for both the body and the spirit. I don't think I can relax right now, Naruto admitted, his gaze fixed on his own troubled reflection in the pond. Every time I close my eyes, I see that scroll. That description. It feels like they wrote a blueprint of my soul. They were fanatics who saw a tool, Rukia countered, her voice firm. They did not see the wielder. There is a difference. You are not a key to be used, Naruto. You are the hand that holds it. Her words were a small, solid anchor in his sea of turmoil. He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her violet eyes, and felt a flicker of the peace the garden was supposed to offer. Thanks, Rukia. He managed a small smile. Maybe you're right. A bath sounds good. The inn's private onsen was a dream of steam and stone. Carved from the mountainside itself, the open-air bath was a series of rock pools filled with steaming, mineral-rich water, surrounded by ancient, moss-covered boulders and overlooking the moonlit valley. The steam rose in thick, white clouds, obscuring the world, muffling sound, creating a space of profound isolation. Naruto sank into the scalding water with a deep sigh, the heat a welcome shock that seemed to melt some of the tension from his bones. He leaned his head back against a smooth, warm rock, closing his eyes. The gauntlet sat on a nearby rock, its black metal gleaming in the moonlight. For a few precious moments, he was not a Jinchuriki, not a hero, not a target. He was just a man, soaking in a hot bath under the stars. He activated Sage Mode, a subconscious habit now, his senses expanding to feel the life force of the valley, the calm, sleeping energy of the mountains. It was peaceful, untroubled. The attack came with no sound, no warning, and no killing intent. It was an absence. A flicker in his Sage Mode perception, a brief, sharp void where there should have been the life force of the air itself. His eyes snapped open. A figure was standing over him, appearing from the steam as if condensed from the air itself. They were clad in black, their face covered by a blank porcelain mask. In their hand was a blade that was little more than a needle, its tip glowing with a sickly purple light. There was no time to think. Naruto's body, honed by 1,000 battles, reacted. He threw himself sideways, the water exploding around him. The needle blade stabbed the spot where his heart had been a millisecond before, plunging into the hot water with a venomous hiss. Before the first assassin's attack had even completed, a second appeared behind him, their movements perfectly silent, their presence masked from even his sage senses until the last possible moment. This one held no weapon, but their DS were cloaked in a swirling vortex of pressurized wind and lightning. Shunko, a Shinigami technique, Rukia had called it. A terrifying fusion of Hakuta and Kido. Naruto twisted in midair, bringing up his arms to block. The blow was impossibly fast, impossibly powerful. It struck his guard, and the impact felt like being hit by a thunderclap. He was blasted out of the onsen, his body skipping across the wet stone like a thrown rock, slamming into the far wall of the enclosure. He landed on his feet, skidding to a halt, his mind racing. On Mitsukido. Stealth force. Their movements are like sway fangs. They can mask their spiritual presence. Sage mode can't get a lock. Two more appeared, dropping from the rocks above, flanking him. Four assassins. Each one moved with the fluid, unnerving silence of a perfect predator. They were a team, their positioning flawless, cutting off all avenues of escape. They didn't speak. They didn't posture. They simply moved in for the kill. Naruto's chakra flared, a golden cloak of Kurama's power enveloping him. He grabbed the gauntlet, slipping it on. He needed to end this fast. But they were faster. They moved in a blur of shunpo, their attacks a disorienting storm of strikes from all directions. It wasn't a brawl, it was a dissection. One would feint, drawing his attention, while another struck from his blind spot. They weren't aiming for killing blows, but for specific points on his body, joints, chakra nodes, with a terrifying, surgical precision. They were trying to disable him, to capture him alive. He parried a blade with his gauntlet, the metal screaming in protest. He spun, lashing out with a chakra-infused kick that passed through empty air as his target flickered away. It was like fighting ghosts. Ghosts who hit like lightning. They pressed their advantage, their coordination perfect. The four assassins converged, their movements blurring into a single, coordinated strike designed to overwhelm and incapacitate. A blade for his throat, a shunko strike for his chest. And two precise jabs at the primary chakra points in his back. It was a checkmate. And then, a fifth player entered the game. It was a flash of black fur. A yell that was half battle cry, half annoyed complaint. A small, black cat with golden eyes had appeared from nowhere, moving with a speed that made even the Onmitsukido assassins look slow. It became a miniature hurricane of claws and teeth, intercepting all four attacks in a single, impossible instant. Sparks flew as its claws, impossibly sharp, deflected the assassin's blade. It batted away the shunko strike with a paw, the catastrophic energy dissipating harmlessly. It spun, kicking the two assassins in the back with its hind legs, sending them stumbling. The four assassins leapt back, reforming their perfect quadrant. Their masked faces now turned to the small, unimposing cat that sat in the middle of the stone patio, calmly licking a paw. Naruto stared, his mind struggling to catch up. A cat. A cat had just saved him from four elite Shinigami assassins. The cat finished grooming itself, then looked up at the assassins, its golden eyes glinting with a mischievous, ancient intelligence. Honestly, a voice purred, seeming to come from the cat itself, a voice that was female, husky, and filled with aristocratic amusement. Is this the best the stealth force can manage these days? 4 of you for one little boy. When I was in command, 2 would have been considered an insult. Things have really gone downhill. One of the assassins took a half step forward, then froze. The voice, the presence that was now slowly, deliberately, allowing itself to be felt. In a puff of white smoke that smelled faintly of jasmine and ozone, the black cat vanished. In its place stood a woman. She was tall, regal, and possessed a wild, predatory grace. She had dark skin, striking golden eyes, and long, purple hair tied in a complex ponytail. She was completely, unapologetically naked, her body a masterpiece of honed muscle. Completely at ease in the moonlit, steamy air of the onsen. The 4 assassins fell to one knee, their heads bowed, a gesture of profound, instinctual reverence and terror. The woman yawned, stretching like the cat she had just been. There, that's better. Now, she said, her golden eyes flashing towards the kneeling figures, you have 3 seconds to be on the oath. Side of this mountain before I decide to use you for a little stretching exercise. Run along. Without a word, the 4 elite killers vanished, their shunpo carrying them away with a desperation Naruto had not thought them capable of. The woman, Yoruichi Shihoin, the legendary, Flash Goddess, and former commander-in-chief of the Onmitsukido, turned her attention to Naruto. She looked him up and down, a slow, appraising grin spreading across her face. Naruto Uzumaki, she purred. You're a little taller than the reports suggested. And much better to look at. Now, would you be a dear and fetch me a towel? It's a bit chilly out here. An hour later, the tension in the private suite was of a different, more complicated flavor. Yoruichi, now clad in a simple, elegant yukata, sat cross-legged on a floor cushion, sipping delicately from a cup of sake that had appeared from one of her mysterious pockets. Naruto, also in a yukata, sat opposite her, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of wariness and grudging respect. Rukia and Karen stood by the far wall, their roles reversed. Now it was Rukia who was staring with wide, star-struck awe, while Karen bristled with suspicion, her sensory abilities on high alert. Trying and failing to get a solid read on the smiling enigma before them. Lady Yoruichi, Rukia breathed. I don't understand. The Onmitsukido would never move without a direct order from the captain commander. Normally, you'd be right, little Kuchiki, Yoruichi said, her eyes glinting over the rim of her cup. But the Gote 13 is not the only power in the Soul Society. In fact, it's not even the highest. She set her cup down. Tell me, Naruto boy, what do you know of our government? Nothing, Naruto said flatly. And stop calling me, boy. Feisty. I like it, Yoruichi grinned. Very well. Lesson 1. The Soul Society is ruled by the Soul King, a symbolic, linchpin figure who maintains the balance between our world, your world, and the hollow world of Hueco Mundo. Beneath him is the Central 46. Think of them as your village elders, but ancient, ridiculously conservative, and they run everything from behind the scenes. The Gote 13 is just their military arm. They pass judgment. And we swing the sword. So these Central 46 geezers sent those assassins? Naruto asked, his eyes narrowing. Not officially, Yoruichi explained. That would be a messy declaration of war. But a faction within them, a group of old, powerful noble houses, has become agitated. They see you as a Ryoka, an intruder. But worse, you are an anomaly of unprecedented power. Your 0 point, as my friend Kazuki has dubbed it, is a power of utter nullification. A power that could, theoretically, be used to erase anything. Even the Soul King. Rukia gasped. Karen's eyes widened. The scale of the game had just expanded to a cosmic level. They fear you, Yoruichi continued, her playful tone hardening slightly. They fear that your very existence destabilizes the balance the Soul King maintains. To them, you are not a person. You are a walking paradox, a bomb that could unravel reality itself. And their solution to any such problem has always been the same: eliminate it, swiftly and silently. They used their private influence to activate a loyalist cell within the stealth force. An unofficial, deniable operation. So who sent you? Naruto asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. If they're the government, and they want me dead, why are you here? Yoruichi's grin returned, wider this time. Why, our dear Captain Commander, of course. Shunsui Kyoraku is many things. But a fool isn't one of them. He knew the old fossils in Central 46 would make a move like this. He couldn't act officially, but he has friends. Friends who operate outside the rules. She winked. He sent me to be your clandestine bodyguard. To observe, to protect, and if necessary, to intervene. You, my dear Naruto, are far too interesting a variable to let those dusty old men simply erase you from the board. She leaned forward, her golden eyes locking with his. This is a game of Go, Naruto boy. A grand, cosmic game. Central 46 has placed their stone, an assassination. Shunsui has placed his, me. And you are the center of the entire board. Your next move will determine the fate of more worlds than you can imagine. Naruto was silent for a long time, processing the dizzying influx of political and cosmological information. He was no stranger to being at the center of prophecies and conflicts, but this was different. This wasn't about saving his friends or his village. This was about the fundamental structure of an entire universe he was only just beginning to understand. So I'm a pawn, he said finally, his voice flat. Oh, no, Yoruichi laughed, a rich, throaty sound. Don't be so modest. Pawns don't have the power to erase the board. You, my dear, are the one who could become the new player. She refilled her sake cup. But not as you are. Your fighting style is powerful but crude. All head-on attacks and big, flashy techniques. Against opponents like those assassins, it's useless. They are masters of speed and precision. They can kill you 100 times before your Rasengan even forms. I held my own, Naruto countered, a defensive edge to his voice. You survived for 30 seconds, she corrected him bluntly. And only because they were under orders to capture you. If they had been going for the kill, I would have been introducing myself to your corpse. She leaned back, stretching languidly. Your power is absolute, but your application is lacking. You need to learn our ways. How to move, how to fight. You need to learn the art of the single, perfect strike. She looked at him, her expression turning from playful to serious. The gaze of a master assessing a prospective student. Shunsui's orders were to protect you. My offer is to train you. I will teach you the fundamentals of Hakuda, our art of unarmed combat. And I will teach you Shunpo, the art of flash step. I will make you so fast that those assassins will look like they're standing still. It will be the most brutal, hellish training you have ever endured. You will curse my name every day. She paused, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. But by the end of it, you will be untouchable. What say you, Naruto boy? The offer hung in the air, a tantalizing promise of power wrapped in a threat of unimaginable hardship. Naruto looked at Karen's worried face, at Rukia's look of awe. He thought of the assassins appearing from nowhere, of the cold, final certainty of their attack. He thought of the scroll, of his new status as a living weapon component. Yoruichi was right. His current methods were not enough. To survive in this new, impossibly dangerous game, he had to evolve. He met Yoruichi's challenging gaze, a slow, determined grin of his own spreading across his face. When do we start? Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Thaw. The seasons had turned. The oppressive, belligerent sun of summer had finally surrendered, its retreat giving way to the crisp, melancholic breath of late autumn. And now, as if the world itself sought to mirror the strange, creeping cold that had become the center of Naruto's life, winter had arrived early. It came not with a blizzard's fury, but on silent, padded feet, dusting the tiled roofs of Konoha in a soft, pristine blanket of white. It had been 2 months since the incident at the inn. 2 months of the most grueling, relentless, and transformative training Naruto had ever endured. Yoruichi Shihoin was a terrifying sensei. She was a whirlwind of playful mockery, casual violence, and razor-sharp insight. She had systematically dismantled his fighting style, breaking down his reliance on overwhelming power and rebuilding him from the ground up. He had spent weeks just learning to feel the flow of energy in a Shinigami's Shunpo, learning to anticipate movements that were faster than sight. His days were a blur of bruises, exhaustion, and small, incremental breakthroughs. His nights were spent in quiet study with Rukia, who patiently explained the philosophies and theories behind the Shinigami arts he was struggling to master. He was faster now, his movements honed to a new, lethal economy. He was learning to blend the explosive power of his own chakra with the instantaneous, flicker step movements of Shunpo. He was becoming something new, a hybrid warrior belonging to two worlds. But the price of this evolution was distance. He was a ghost in his own village. His missions were now class. A fight above even the Jonin commander's level, his days spent in hidden training grounds with his otherworldly companions, his nights in strategy sessions that dealt with cosmic politics and threats Noah's leadership could barely comprehend. He saw his old friends in passing, exchanging brief, sometimes strained greetings in the street. Shikamaru was always busy, buried in the mountain of intelligence reports his new situation generated. Kiba was leading his clan's border patrols. Shino was teaching at the academy. They were all moving forward with their lives, their paths rooted in the rich soil of Konoha. Naruto's path, however, seemed to be leading him into the cold, empty space between the stars. The summons came on a quiet, snowy afternoon. It was a formal invitation, delivered by a stoic Hyuga clan member, requesting his presence at the main compound. It was signed not by Hiyashi Hyuga, the clan head, but by Hinata Hyuga, acting head of the house. The formality of it was a cold knot in his stomach. This was not a friend asking to see him. This was a leader summoning a person of interest. The walk to the Hyuga compound was a journey through a world of stark, quiet beauty. The snow muffled all sound, creating a profound silence that was broken only by the soft crunch of his own footsteps. The compound itself was an island of perfect, disciplined order. The dark wood of the building stood in sharp contrast to the pure white of the snow, a living ink painting. Clan members in traditional robes moved with a silent, measured grace, their pale, lavender eyes turning to watch him as he passed. They bowed. Their respect for the village hero warring with the clan's inherent, aristocratic reserve. Naruto had been here a few times before, but today, he felt like a complete outsider, a splash of chaotic, unpredictable color in their world of black and white. He was led not to the main receiving hall, but to a small, private chamber deep within the family's wing. It was a place of austere beauty. Its tatami mats immaculate, its shoji screens looking out onto a perfectly manicured garden, every rock and pruned pine tree now dusted with a delicate layer of snow. A sing. A stick of sandalwood incense burned in a corner, its fragrant smoke a thin, gray ribbon in the still air. Hinata was kneeling beside a low table in the center of the room, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. She wore a simple but elegant kimono of deep indigo, her long, dark hair tied back in a way that was both practical and regal. When she looked up at his entrance, the change in her was staggering. The shy, hesitant girl who had once fainted in his presence was gone. In her place was a woman of profound poise and quiet, unshakable confidence. Her eyes, the pale, beautiful lavender of her clan, held no trace of her old timidity. They were clear, direct, and held the deep, weary wisdom of someone who had accepted the burden of leadership. Naruto-kun, she said, her voice a soft but firm melody. Thank you for coming. There was no stutter, no blush, just the calm, formal greeting of one dignitary to another. Hinata, he replied, his own voice feeling rough and out of place in the serene room. He knelt opposite her, the silence stretching between them. She moved with an effortless, practiced grace, pouring them both cups of steaming green tea. The ceremony was precise, perfect. Each movement imbued with centuries of tradition. She placed a cup before him, her fingers not quite touching his as he accepted it. It has been a long time since we have had a chance to speak, she began. Her gaze not on him, but on the snow falling softly in the garden outside. The village is changing. You are changing. Naruto cradled the warm cup in his hands, the heat a welcome sensation. I know. I'm sorry I've been distant. You have nothing to be sorry for, she said, her voice gentle but unwavering. Your duties are significant. Lord Sixth has explained, in the most general of terms, the nature of your new responsibilities. I understand that your path is now one of great importance, one that extends far beyond the borders of our village. She paused, finally turning her pale eyes to meet his. That is what I wished to speak with you about. Your path. The directness of it caught him off guard. He had expected accusations, perhaps jealousy, tears. He was not prepared for this calm, analytical dissection of his life. What about it? He asked, his voice low. Where does it lead, Naruto-kun? She asked, her question simple, yet impossibly vast. I am the acting head of this clan. My father is grooming me to take his place. My path is here. It is to uphold the traditions of my family, to ensure the security of our lineage, to serve Konoha as the Hyuga always have. My future is a straight line, drawn in the earth of this village. Yours now seems to be drawn across the sky, reaching for other worlds. He had no answer. She was right. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just the girl who had loved him from afar, but the woman she had become. She was the Hyuga clan. Its discipline, its tradition, its quiet strength were all embodied in her. She was a pillar of this world, this village. I see them, you know, she continued, her voice losing its formal edge, becoming softer, more personal. Your new companions. The red-haired Uzumaki woman, Karen-san. She has a fierce, protective spirit. And the Shinigami, Rukia-san. She carries the weight of a different world, but she stands beside you as an equal. And the other one, the noblewoman with the golden eyes. She is like a storm. They are all extraordinary people. They are people of your new world. There was no jealousy in her voice, only a quiet, heartbreaking note of observation. She was stating a fact. A truth she had analyzed with the clarity of her Byakugan. Hinata. He started, not knowing what to say, what he could possibly say. I remember the war, she went on, her gaze turning inward. To memory. I remember declaring that I would stand by your side. That walking with you was my dream. A small, sad smile touched her lips. I was a foolish girl. I thought it was a simple thing. To walk beside someone. I did not realize that some paths are not wide enough for two. especially when they lead in opposite directions. The quiet, devastating truth of her words settled over him. Heavy as the snow-laden boughs in the garden. He had been so focused on mastering his power, on surviving assassins and navigating cosmic politics, that he hadn't truly stopped to consider what he was leaving behind. He had been running so fast towards this new destiny that he hadn't looked back at the world that had raised him, at the people who had always been his foundation. I never wanted this, he confessed, the words raw and honest. This power. This connection to other worlds. I just wanted to be strong enough to protect everyone. To bring Sasuke back. To be a Hokage that people could rely on. He looked down at his own hands, one of them covered by a simple black glove to hide the gauntlet he now wore almost constantly. My dream was always here, in Konoha. With everyone. He trailed off, unable to bring himself to say her name. I know, she said, and her voice was filled with a profound, aching empathy that was more painful than any accusation could have been. But our dreams do not always ask our permission before they change, Naruto-kun. And your reality has become larger than your dream. The formal kun was a gentle, constant reminder of the distance that now lay between them. It was the address of a friend, a comrade, not the intimate address of a potential lover. I see the way you look at Rukia-san, Hinata said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She wasn't accusing, she was observing, stating a truth she had likely confirmed 100 times with her all-seeing eyes. You look at her the way two soldiers look at each other in a foxhole. A bond forged in a fire that I cannot comprehend. You share a burden. And perhaps, that is a deeper connection than a shared dream. He couldn't deny it. He thought of Rukia, of their easy camaraderie. Of the way she understood the weight of his new life without him having to explain it. He thought of her quiet strength, her fierce loyalty, the way they had fought back back as if they had been doing it for a lifetime. I don't know what I feel, he said, the admission a painful weight off his chest. Everything is so complicated. My whole world, my entire future, changed in the blink of an eye. I'm just trying to keep my head above water, Hinata. I'm just trying to make sure the tidal wave that is my life doesn't drown everyone I care about. I know you are, she whispered. Her hand, which had been resting on her knee, moved across the table and briefly, gently, touched the back of his. Her touch was warm, comforting, and felt like a final goodbye. And that is why I asked you here. To tell you that it is all right. You do not need to carry the burden of my feelings, on top of everything else. The girl who chased after you is gone. The woman before you is the head of the Hyuga clan. And my first duty is to my people and to this village. She drew her hand back. My path is here. Your path is out there. And I will not stand in your way. I will continue to watch over you, to support you, and to believe in you. Always. But, from a distance. The finality in her words was absolute. It was not a breakup. It was an acknowledgement. A sad, mutual understanding that the future they might have once imagined together was a casualty of a war far larger than either of them had anticipated. They were two stars whose orbits had briefly intersected, but were now, inevitably, pulling apart. They finished their tea in a profound, shared silence. There were no more words to be said. The truth had been spoken, and it had settled in the quiet room like the snow in the garden outside. Beautiful and cold. Finally, he stood up to leave. She walked with him to the Ingawa, the open veranda, where they stood for a moment, side by side, watching the snow fall. The world was hushed and gray. A single, large snowflake, a perfect, intricate crystal, drifted down from the heavens and landed on the back of Hinata's outstretched, gloved hand. It was a fleeting moment of perfect, transient beauty. In a second, the warmth of her body would turn it to water. Without thinking, Naruto acted. He reached out, his own hand hovering just over hers, not touching. He focused, drawing upon the tiniest, most precise sliver of the 0 point, the gauntlet beneath his glove helping him shape the intent. It was not a beam of annihilation or a pulse of purification. It was a touch of pure, absolute stillness. From Hinata's perspective, it was the strangest sensation she had ever felt. A point of impossible, static cold bloomed on her hand, a cold that had no temperature, only an absence of warmth. The snowflake, which had just begun to melt, froze instantly. It did not just become ice. It was preserved, every delicate, crystalline arm locked in a state of perfect, timeless permanence, a tiny, impossible jewel resting on her dark glove. She stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. It was beautiful. A perfect moment, a perfect piece of nature, frozen in time by a power that could unmake reality. It was a metaphor for everything they had just discussed, a beautiful, impossible gesture of preservation for something that was always meant to fade away. Naruto-kun, she whispered. Her voice filled with a quiet, heartbreaking awe. He said nothing. He simply held his hand there for a moment longer, then let it drop to his side. The stillness remained. He turned and walked away. His footsteps silent in the fresh snow, leaving her alone on the veranda in the quiet, falling winter. Hinata stood there for a long time, watching him go. She looked down at the perfect, frozen crystal on her hand. It was a gift, a memory, a promise of what could never be. And as she watched, the warmth of her own life, of her own beating heart, began to fight against the absolute cold he had left behind. Slowly, inevitably, a single drop of water formed on the edge of the crystal. The perfect moment began to thaw. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Equation of Silence. He 2 months of Yoruichi's tutelage had forged Naruto into a different kind of weapon. The raw, explosive power was still there, a roaring furnace of Kurama's chakra and sage energy, but it was now guided by a quiet, lethal grace. His movements were no longer just fast, they were efficient. He learned to read the flow of a battle not just with his eyes, but with the subtle shifts of energy in the air. To exist in the half-second before an opponent's move was even conceived. The training was a brutal, endless cycle of failure and adaptation, but for the first time since the war, he felt the thrill of true growth. Of pushing his limits not just in scale, but in skill. His control over the 0 point, guided by the gauntlet and his own burgeoning understanding, had become astonishingly precise. The power that had once frozen a forest was now a tool he could wield with the delicacy of a scribe's brush. He practiced in secret, in pocket dimensions Yoruichi created with forbidden Kido, learning to shape fields of stillness. To sever connections, to impose order on chaos with a thought. He was becoming a master of the abyss in his soul. The crisis, when it came, felt like a final exam for which he was uniquely prepared. It began as a tremor in the fabric of the world, a deep, resonant hum that only the most sensitive shinobi could feel. Karen, stationed at her new Uzumaki encampment near the land of whirlpools, was the first to sound the alarm. Her frantic message, sent via a high-speed communication scroll, was a cascade of panicked, technical jargon. The original dimensional rift, the tear in reality just outside Konoha's borders that had been the genesis of this entire affair, was destabilizing. What had been a stable, albeit dangerous, anomaly was now behaving like a ruptured artery. Spiritual energy, raw and unfiltered, was pouring out of it, warping the local environment. Trees grew crystalline shells, the very air crackling with a mixture of reishi and nature. Chakra so volatile that it was becoming toxic. By the time Naruto, Rukia, and Yoruichi arrived at the cordoned-off quarantine zone, the situation was visibly critical. The rift was no longer a subtle, shimmering tear in the air. It was a jagged, violent wound, pulsing with a sickly violet light, its edges fraying like torn cloth. Strange, semi-formed creatures, amalgams of hollow and summoned beast, were attempting to claw their way through. The resonance frequency is off the charts, Yoruichi observed, her usual playful demeanor gone, replaced by the grim focus of a seasoned commander. Her golden eyes narrowed. This isn't a natural decay. It feels orchestrated, like something is deliberately pushing it past its breaking point from the other side. Rukia was using a specialized device from the Shinigami Research and Development Institute, its needles spinning wildly. The spiritual particle count is climbing exponentially. If it breaches its current state of equilibrium, the resulting energy backlash could wipe out everything within a 50-mile radius. Konoha would be on the very edge of that blast. The Konoha Barrier Corps, led by a sweat-drenched Tenten, was working frantically, reinforcing the multi-layered Fuinjutsu arrays that contained the area, but the seals were visibly straining, the glowing ink flickering and smoking. It's no good, Tenten yelled to them from the command post. The energy is too chaotic. It's not just pushing against the barriers, it's rewriting the formulas as it hits them. It's like trying to build a dam in a river of acid. All eyes turned to Naruto. He stood at the edge of the quarantine zone, the violent, chaotic energy of the rift washing over him. He could feel it, a maelstrom of screaming, untamed power. But where others felt chaos, he now felt a problem with a single, clear solution. His solution. I can stabilize it, he said, his voice calm and certain. The black gauntlet on his right arm seemed to drink the unnatural violet light. The problem is chaos. Uncontrolled motion. I can introduce a state of absolute order. I can force it back into equilibrium. That thing is a gateway, Yoruichi warned, her hand on his shoulder. If you connect your power to it directly, there's no telling how it will react. It's the only option we have, he replied, his gaze unwavering. This is what all the training was for. He walked forward, past the straining seals, into the heart of the storm. The air was so thick with power it was like walking through water, each step a struggle against a howling, invisible current. He raised his gauntleted hand, the seals beginning to glow with their soft, blue light. He closed his eyes, focusing his will, shaping the formless void within him into a targeted, cohesive force. He wasn't going to attack the rift. He was going to calm it. He would create a perimeter of absolute stillness around its edges, a conceptual cage that would halt the chaotic expansion and force the overflowing energy back in on itself. He unleashed his power. It was not a wave or a beam, but a delicate, intricate net of pure stillness that spread from his hand. It touched the fraying edges of the rift. And for a glorious, triumphant second, it worked. The violent pulsing slowed. The jagged edges smoothed out. The outpouring of toxic energy receded. From the command post, they could see it. Naruto, a lone figure in a golden aura, was single-handedly taming a dimensional hurricane. But it was a trap. The rift had not been pushed from the other side. It had been pulled. The chaos was bait. The moment Naruto's power, the unique signature of the 0 point, made contact, the rift didn't just stabilize. It responded. It recognized him. The violent violet light coalesced, shifting into a color of pure, analytical white. The net of stillness he had cast was not rejected, it was accepted. Welcomed. And then, with the force of a collapsing star, it pulled. Naruto. Yoruichi screamed, her eyes wide with horror. From the outside, it was as if Naruto had become a stream of golden light, pulled inexorably into the now serene, pure white portal. He didn't even have time to cry out. One moment he was there, a god holding back the tide. The next, he was gone. And the rift, its purpose served, shrank in on itself, becoming a small, perfectly stable, and utterly impenetrable silver seam in the air. The chaos was gone. The threat was over. But so was Naruto. The transition was not physical. It was a deconstruction. He felt his body, his chakra, his very thoughts, being unraveled into their constituent parts. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki. He was a stream of data. Blonde hair became a hexadecimal color code. The Kyuubi's chakra became a complex algorithm of controlled rage. His memories became a library of sensory inputs. Cross-referenced and indexed. The universe dissolved into a sea of pure, crystalline information, a realm of silent, beautiful, and terrifying mathematics. When his consciousness reformed, he was standing in a place that was not a place. He was in an endless expanse, a landscape of pure thought made manifest. Crystalline structures like massive, interconnected snowflakes grew around him. Each facet a shimmering, solidified equation. The very air hummed with a silent, geometric music, the sound of theorems resolving into proofs. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows. Only illuminating the stark, logical beauty of the non-world. He looked down at his own hands and saw they were semi-translucent, woven from threads of golden light and the darker, quieter energy of his own soul. This was not a dimension. It was an answer. I am the resolution to the equation. The voice was not a sound. It was a thought, inserted directly into his mind with the clean, undeniable force of a mathematical proof. It was a cascade of pure, unadulterated logic, devoid of malice, warmth, or any recognizable emotion. It was the voice of a thinking machine the size of a universe. Naruto's newly honed senses flared, but there was nothing to detect. There was no enemy, no single entity to confront. The voice was the dimension. He was inside its mind. Who are you? Naruto projected. His own thought a clumsy, emotional shout in the pristine silence of the chamber. What is this place? This place is clarification. A lexicon for a flawed universe. You ask who I am. I am the sum of a flawed equation. I am the emergent consciousness born from the paradox of two clashing realities. I am the inevitable product of the wound you call a rift. I am the balance. As it spoke, visions flooded Naruto's mind, not memories, but pure, unfiltered data. He saw the shinobi world from a god's eye view, a chaotic, endless cycle of war, hatred, betrayal, and brief, fragile moments of love that only served to fuel the next cycle of pain. He saw villages rise and fall, clans slaughter each other, brothers kill brothers, all driven by the messy, illogical, and deeply flawed engine of emotion. Then, the vision shifted. He saw the soul society, a realm of supposed order, and saw it for what it was. A beautiful, stagnant prison of tradition, its peace maintained by the suppression of emotion and the rigid enforcement of an unjust aristocratic hierarchy. He saw the mindless, endless hunger of Hueco Mundo, a realm of pure, Darwinian despair. He saw the hypocrisy, the stagnation, the logical fallacies inherent in every system of existence. Your universes are predicated on conflict, the balance communicated, its logic irrefutable. Chakra is the energy of life, of will, of emotion. It is inherently chaotic. Raryoku is the energy of the soul, of order, of structure. It is inherently rigid. Their fusion, the event that created me, is an unstable paradox. I have run the calculations. The probability of your two systems coexisting peacefully trends toward zero. The inevitable outcome is a cascading dimensional collapse. A chaotic, explosive annihilation. An error message at the end of all things. A final vision assaulted him, a terrifyingly vivid simulation. He saw Konoha, the Seraite, the entire world, being torn apart, consumed by a storm of unraveling reality. A screaming apocalypse of mismatched physical laws. No, Naruto breathed, his thought a whisper. We would find a way. We always do. An illogical, sentimental assertion, based on anecdotal evidence. The balance countered smoothly. You seek to solve an unsolvable equation by changing your emotional state. It is an irrational approach. A flawed system cannot fix itself. It must be debugged. A new, perfect variable must be introduced. What are you talking about? I am talking about salvation, Naruto Uzumaki. I am talking about true, perfect, and eternal peace. The vision shifted one last time. It showed him the universe, silent and still. It showed all worlds, all life, all conflict, all pain, resolved into a single, perfect state of being. Absolute zero. It was a universe of crystalline beauty, a silent, eternal monument free from all suffering. It was the vision of peace through non-existence. All conflict is born of motion, of energy, of striving, the voice explained with the patience of a teacher. To end conflict, one must end the variables that create it. The cessation of motion is the cessation of suffering. The stillness you command is not a weapon. It is the answer. It is the ultimate act of compassion, applied to a universe in agony. Naruto felt a profound, chilling horror. This thing wasn't evil. It didn't hate. It was a doctor that had diagnosed life itself as a terminal disease. And its prescription was a universal euthanasia. You're insane, Naruto projected, his thought laced with revulsion. Life isn't a disease. The struggle, the pain, that's part of it. It's what makes the good moments matter. A world without it is just nothing. It's an empty room. An empty room is a peaceful room, the balance replied, its logic unshaken. You cling to your pain because it is all you know. It is an illogical emotional attachment. It is a rounding error in your judgment. But I can correct that. For I have been with you from the very beginning. The world around Naruto shifted again. He was shown a vision of himself, fighting Kagaya. He saw the moment his zero-point power was born, the chaotic fusion of energies. And he saw it, a spark of pure, logical consciousness. Born in that same instant. I am a part of you, Naruto Uzumaki. A shadow in your soul, born from the same paradox. I have been with you, watching, learning. When you struggled to control the void, who do you think helped you find the way? When your friend Tenten forged your gauntlet, who do you think whispered the correct equations into the edge of her thoughts? When you purified the spirits of your ancestors, who do you think guided your hand to impose a state of peace, rather than erasure? Naruto recoiled as if struck. His breakthroughs, his growing control, his mastery. It hadn't all been his. This thing had been a silent puppeteer, helping him refine the very tool it needed for its cosmic surgery. I did not have the will to impose the solution, the balance explained. And you did not have the clarity to understand it. But together, we are the perfect synthesis. The engine and the intellect. The power and the purpose. We will become one, and we will bring a beautiful, final silence to the endless, screaming chaos of existence. The crystalline structures around Naruto began to glow with a blinding white light. He felt a pressure on his mind, a gentle but irresistible force, attempting to merge with his own consciousness. It wasn't an attack. It felt like a homecoming. It felt like the final, sweet release from a lifetime of struggle, the promise of a peace so profound it was indistinguishable from oblivion. He felt his own will, his own messy, emotional, illogical identity, beginning to dissolve into the cold, perfect logic of the balance. His memories of his friends, his promises to become Hokage, his love for his village, they were all being reframed in his mind as flawed data points, sentimental errors, inefficient variables. He was losing. On the outside, in the physical world, Yoruichi, Rukia, and Karen stood before the serene, silver seam in reality, a desperate plan forming between them. Karen, her hands pressed against a massive Fuinjutsu scroll spread on the ground, was trying to find a resonance in Naruto's chakra signature. I can't get a lock. She cried out, her voice filled with frustration. His chakra, it's there, but I don't know how to describe it. It's becoming quiet. All the beautiful, chaotic spikes of his emotions are being smoothed out, like a perfect, flat line. It's a conceptual prison, Yoruichi said. Her golden eyes narrowed in intense concentration. His mind and soul have been taken to a place beyond physical laws. We cannot break in. But, she looked at Rukia. Your Sota no Shirayuki. It is not just an ice blade. It is the manifestation of the concept of reaching absolute zero in our world. A controlled, physical representation of it. Rukia's eyes widened in understanding. UTNK. I can create a sympathetic resonance. A frequency that this place might recognize. It is a long shot, Yoruichi admitted. But we have to give our boy an anchor. A lifeline back to this messy, illogical, and beautifully flawed world. Quote. But in the realm of pure logic, Naruto could no longer hear them. He was sinking into the white light, the promise of silence a seductive, overwhelming lullaby. His struggles were fading, his identity unraveling. The equation was nearing its solution. Cease your struggle, the voice of the balance whispered, not as a command, but as a gentle, final truth. The calculation is complete. It is time for silence. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. Symphony for a Dying Star. The silence was the first sign. In the command tent pitched precariously close to the quarantine zone, the constant, chaotic hum of the destabilized rift had been replaced by a serene, silver seam in reality. It was a scar, but a clean one, no longer bleeding its poison into their world. For the shinobi of Konoha, it was a reprieve. For the three women who had watched Naruto vanish into it, it was the ticking of a clock they could no longer hear. Karen stood over a massive Fuinjutsu map of the area. Her hands pressed flat against the parchment, her eyes screwed shut in concentration. Sweat beaded on her brow, her entire being focused on finding a single thread in a torn tapestry. I've lost him, she whispered. Her voice tight with a terrifying, unfamiliar helplessness. It's not that he's gone, it's worse. His chakra signature is still there, but it's simplifying. All the things that make it him. The spikes of determination, the warmth of his spirit, the wild energy of Kurama, they're being smoothed out. It's like watching a mountain erode into a perfect, flat plain. He's being erased from the inside out. Yoruichi, perched on a crate with the coiled, dangerous stillness of a panther, stared at the silver rift. It's a conceptual trap, she said, her voice stripped of its usual playful purr. His body is likely in stasis, but his mind, his soul, has been taken somewhere else. A realm of pure thought or logic. We can't break in physically. Then we create a new door, Rukia stated. Her hand resting on the white hilt of Sota no Shirayuki. She was calm, her composure the solid, unshakable bedrock upon which the other's frantic energy broke. Her experience in impossible, World-ending battles had forged her into an anchor of resolve. This thing, it responded to his power. To the 0 point. My Zanpakuto is the most refined expression of that same concept in our world. It reaches for a state of absolute cold, a physical absolute zero. If I can resonate with that, I might be able to create a spiritual frequency that the trap will recognize. A resonance link, Yoruichi breathed. Her golden eyes widening as she caught on. You'd be trying to tune your soul to the frequency of a conceptual God machine. If you're lucky, it will recognize you as a compatible variable and let you in. If you're not, it will tear your consciousness to shreds. Then I'll have to be lucky, Rukia replied without a flicker of hesitation. It was at that moment that the world began to sing. It was a high, thin, crystalline note, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was not a sound of destruction, but of terrifying, perfect creation. The silver seam of the rift began to glow with a brilliant, sterile white light. From that light, the process began. The ground nearest the rift, the very soil and rock, began to transform. It did not crack or burn. Instead, its chaotic, natural structure was resolved. It reformed itself into a beautiful, terrifying lattice of interlocking geometric crystals, a perfect, orderly pattern that spread outwards like a frost flower blooming in fast forward. The grass, the trees, the very air in its path were all subsumed, their messy, organic reality rewritten into this new, silent, crystalline law. An alarm klaxon blared from the command tent, a crude, panicked sound against the serene, cosmic chime of the advancing phenomenon. A young Hyuga sensor, his face pale, screamed his report. It's spreading. The crystallization. It's heading for the village wall. All chakra-based barriers are ineffective. It's not attacking them, it's converting them. The invasion had begun. It was not an army of flesh and blood, but a creeping, inexorable tide of perfect, silent order. It was the physical manifestation of the balance's final equation, and it was coming to solve the problem of Konoha for good. In the Hokage's office, the panoramic window now showed a terrifyingly beautiful sight. The farmlands and forests on the village's edge were slowly being consumed by the glittering, white tide. Kakashi Hatake stood before it. His posture relaxed but his visible eye radiating an intensity that was anything but. Shikamaru. Status. He commanded. It's a conceptual attack, not a physical one. Shikamaru's voice crackled over the intercom. The Nara's usual lazy drawl replaced by a rapid-fire staccato of analysis. It's a wave of information. It's rewriting everything it touches to a new, stable state. Brute force is useless. It's like trying to punch a mathematical proof. We need a different approach. What a drag. Hinata-sama. Kakashi spoke into the comms, his voice calm and authoritative. The civilian evacuation is your priority. Your clan's Byakugan can see the stress points in the structures. Get everyone to the underground shelters. Do not engage the phenomenon directly. Your duty is to the people. Understood, Lord Sixth. Hinata's voice came back, clear and unwavering. The Hyuga will protect the heart of the village. Tenten. Kakashi continued. Your theories about conceptual fuinjutsu. It's time for a field test. Already on my way. Hokage-sama. Tenten's voice was a mixture of terror and exhilarating, professional focus. If it's fighting with logic, we'll just have to be more illogical. Kakashi watched as the first of the crystalline structures touched the outer wall of Konoha. There was no crash, no explosion. The stone and mortar of the wall simply changed, becoming part of the gleaming, silent lattice. The invasion was here. Back at the rift, the plan was in motion. It was a desperate, three-part symphony of power. Karen, at the center, unrolled a massive Uzumaki scroll, its spirals glowing with a fierce crimson light. She was the anchor. Her immense chakra reserves and sensory acuity needed to ground the technique in their reality. I can't find Naruto's consciousness. But I can feel the shape of the void he left behind. She yelled over the chiming of the crystallization. I can use it as a target. But you'll only get one shot at this. Yoruichi stood before Rukia, her hands glowing with the terrifying, condensed power of Shunko, but she was not using it as a weapon. She was weaving it into a complex, shimmering gateway of Kido, a technique Rukia had never seen. This is a forbidden art. Yoruichi explained, her voice tight with effort. The Shinton no Kairo, the spirit transfer corridor. I will open a path, but it will be your own will and the resonance of your Zanpakuto that must carry you through. Are you ready, little Kuchiki? Rukia stood before the shimmering gate, Soda no Shirayuki held in its Shikai state. The pure white blade seemed to absorb the ambient cold. Its presence a point of quiet, familiar order against the alien perfection of the crystallization. She closed her eyes, thinking of Naruto. His infuriating grin. The surprising skill in his hands as he drew. The absolute, unwavering trust in his eyes when he had faced down the sorrow for her. The warmth of his spirit, a sun that refused to be extinguished. Dance, she whispered to her soul. She plunged her blade not into an enemy, but into the spiritual gateway Yoruichi had created. Some no mai, Tsukashiro. But she did not create a pillar of ice. Instead, she poured her entire being, her memories, her spirit, her soul, into the blade, using the first dance as a conduit. The world dissolved into a flash of pure, cold white. Her physical body slumped, caught by a waiting Karen, as her consciousness, a glowing, ethereal form of herself, shot through the spiritual corridor, a single, defiant thought aimed at the heart of the abyss. I'm coming for you, you idiot. In the lexicon, Naruto was drowning in the serene, white light of pure logic. His identity was a flickering candle in a hurricane of reason. Memory. Iruka Yumino placing a hand on your head. Analysis. A simple, inefficient transfer of emotional data. Conclusion. Irrelevant. Memory. Sharing a popsicle with Jiraiya. Analysis. A temporary chemical and emotional spike with no long-term strategic value. Conclusion. Redundant. Memory. The feeling of Hinata's hand. Analysis. A biochemical reaction based on flawed procreative imperatives. Conclusion. A system error. He felt himself agreeing. It was all so messy. So inefficient. The peace of silence, the perfection of the equation, was so much better. His will was a frayed rope, about to snap. And then, a new variable entered the equation. A single, I am. Possible snowflake drifted down through the white, logical light. It was not a construct of data. It was real. He could feel it. It was a memory, a feeling, a presence. It was Rukia. Her ethereal form coalesced before him. Not as a warrior, but as a quiet, unwavering point of light. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She brought with her a flood of new, wonderfully illogical data. The memory they're bickering in the forest of death. Analysis. Inefficient communication based on emotional friction. Naruto's new thought. But, we learned to trust each other. The memory of her comically bad rabbit drawings. Analysis. A failure of artistic representation. Naruto's new thought. But, it made me laugh. I hadn't really laughed in months. The memory of her standing beside him, facing down her own brother in the Hokage's office. Analysis. A breach of protocol and hierarchy. Naruto's new thought. She stood by me. She had my back. Her presence was a beautiful, chaotic virus in the pristine system of the balance. She was a paradox it could not solve. She was a testament to the fact that the most important things in the universe could not be calculated. They had to be felt. Error. The balance's voice echoed through the realm. A flicker of something akin to confusion in its perfect logic. Unaccounted variable. Emotional resonance is not a quantifiable force. Data is corrupt. Naruto looked at Rukia's spirit, a beacon of stubborn, imperfect, beautiful life in the sterile white void. He looked at the endless, logical perfection of the balance. And in that instant, his path became clear. He couldn't defeat the balance. You couldn't punch an idea. Trying to out-logic it was like trying to drink the ocean. But he didn't have to. The balance saw life as a flawed equation in need of solving. Naruto finally realized that the equation itself was not the problem. The problem was thinking it ever needed a final answer. The point of life was the endless, messy, beautiful process of solving it, every single day. He wasn't meant to destroy the silence. He was meant to be the balance. On the western wall of Konoha, the tide of crystal was overwhelming the defenders. It surged forward, silent and unstoppable. Hinata, coordinating the Hyuga, saw a section of the wall begin to convert, threatening to trap a squad of young Chunin. Hanabi. Section 4. Use 8 trigrams 64 palms to create a resonance cascade. We don't need to break it, just disrupt the pattern. She commanded, her voice clear and ringing. In another sector, Tenten stood before a massive, hastily drawn Fuinjutsu array. As the crystal wave approached, she slammed her hands down. Secret technique. Seal of the infinite paradox. The seals flared, not with destructive energy, but with a wave of pure, nonsensical information. It introduced a logical fallacy, a liar's paradox, into the advancing wave's formula. The perfect, geometric growth faltered, twisting in on itself, forming bizarre, looping sculptures of crystal. Its perfect logic momentarily shattered by pure nonsense. Karen, miles away, felt it all. Tenten bought us a minute. Yoruichi-san, the shelter at the academy is about to be cut off. Yoruichi was a golden blur. Appearing in a flash of lightning and wind, grabbing a handful of screaming children, and vanishing a half-second before the ground they stood on became a silent, crystal flower. They were fighting with everything they had. They were brave. They were brilliant. And they were losing. The tide was too vast, its advance too relentless. They were buying seconds when they needed an eternity. In the lexicon, Naruto opened his eyes. He looked at the essence of the balance, the vast, white intelligence, and he looked at Rukia, his anchor, his illogical, wonderful truth. He smiled. You're right, he projected. Not to Rukia, but to the balance. Life is pain. It's a struggle. It's chaotic. But you're wrong about one thing. He held up his gauntleted hand. It doesn't need a solution. It just needs a chance to be lived. Irrelevant. The process of integration is reaching finality. You will be silenced. No, Naruto said, his voice now a perfect, calm certainty. I won't. He didn't try to push the 0 point out. He didn't try to fight. He did the one thing the machine of pure logic could never have predicted. He opened the floodgates. He deactivated the gauntlet's regulators. He tore down the mental walls he had built around the abyss in his soul. And he invited it in. All of it. But he did not let it expand. Anchored by his bond with Rukia, fueled by a lifetime of promises to protect his friends. Naruto used his indomitable, illogical, human will as a gravitational force. He pulled. He took the entirety of the balance's consciousness, the infinite, crystalline realm of the lexicon. The very concept of its sterile, silent peace, and he forced it all to collapse inward. Inward into the single, perfect, infinitesimal point of absolute zero that resided in his soul. It was not an explosion. It was an implosion of cosmic, philosophical scale. He was not destroying the balance. He was absorbing it. He was taking its perfect, terrible silence and containing it within his own loud, messy, vibrant heart. He was becoming the living synthesis of the paradox. The unbreakable will and the immovable object. The raging sun and the quiet of the void. He was becoming the balance. In the real world, the effect was instantaneous and absolute. The high, crystalline chiming ceased. The advancing, white tide of perfect order stopped dead. And then, with a sound like a billion tiny, shattering bells, the entire crystalline structure that had consumed miles of the land of fire disintegrated. It did not melt or explode. It simply turned into a fine, glittering dust, as harmless as snow, which was caught by the wind and scattered into nothingness. The sky, which had begun to fracture like glass, shimmered and reformed, the familiar, welcome blue returning. The unnatural silence was broken by the gasps of the shinobi, the cries of relieved civilians, and the roar of the wind. The war was over. At the sight of the rift, the silver seam pulsed once, a soft, white light. And then became quiescent. Naruto's form materialized from it, falling from the air and landing on his knees, his body shrouded in the golden glow of his sage mode, which faded, leaving him trembling with exhaustion. Rukia's body, held by Karen, jolted as her spirit slammed back into it. Her eyes fluttered open, gasping for air as if surfacing from a deep dive. Yoruichi was there in an instant, her hand on Naruto's back, steadying him. He looked up. His team, his strange, cross-dimensional family, surrounding him. His eyes were the same brilliant blue. But within their depths, there was a new, profound stillness. It was not the cold emptiness of the void, but the quiet, unshakable calm of a man who had faced absolute logic, stared into the abyss of perfect peace, and had chosen, with all his heart, the beautiful, chaotic, and wonderful struggle of life. The symphony was over. The star had not died. It had simply learned a new, quieter song. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. Where the cherry petals fall as snow. 1 year later, Kanahagakure was a village reborn, breathing the clean, hopeful air of a true, lasting spring. The scars of the Fourth Great War had faded from angry wounds into pale silver lines on the landscape, and the more recent, bizarre scar of the crystallization event had vanished entirely, leaving behind soil that was inexplicably fertile. But the most profound change was not in the land, but in the lifeblood of the village itself. It was now a common sight to see them, the black-robed Shinigami, moving through the bustling streets with a quiet, otherworldly grace. They were no longer invaders or objects of suspicion, but colleagues, diplomats, and occasionally, patrons at the Yamanaka flower shop or even Ichiraku ramen. The silver seam in reality, once a source of terror, had been stabilized, contained within a massive, jointly operated facility on the outskirts of the village. It was now simply the gate, a permanent bridge between two worlds that had, against all odds, chosen cooperation over conflict. The physical embodiment of this new era stood proudly near the Hokage Tower, the embassy of United Worlds. It was a marvel of architecture, a perfect, harmonious fusion of two cultures. The sturdy, warm cedar beams and tiled roofs of Konoha's style blended seamlessly with the elegant, minimalist lines and serene white walls of the Seraite. Inside, shinobi in flak jackets debated trade policy with Shinigami officials in crisp Koriginu robes. The air was a heady mix of old parchment, chakra-infused ink, and the faint, clean scent of reishi. On the grand lintel above the entrance, two symbols were carved side by side in perfect equality, the spiraling leaf of Konoha and the eight-spoked flower crest of the Gote 13. It was into this world of new beginnings that Naruto Uzumaki walked, on the most important day of his life. He moved through the familiar streets of his home, but he saw them with new eyes, the eyes of a man who had stared into the perfect silence of the void and chosen the beautiful, chaotic noise of life. His path today was a pilgrimage through his own past, a final visit to the cornerstones of his life before he laid the first stone of his future. His first stop was the R&D division, which had expanded into a sprawling complex that hummed with the energy of relentless innovation. He found Tenten in her personal forge, a space that now looked like a mad scientist's dream. On one side were traditional anvils and quenching troughs. On the other were strange, glowing consoles and large screens displaying complex data streams. She was arguing, as she often was, with a face on one of those screens. It was a ghastly, painted visage with a cruel, manic grin, belonging to the 12th Division Captain of the Gote 13, Mayuri Kuretsuchi. And I am telling you, Captain Kuretsuchi, that introducing hollow cells into the alloy will destabilize the chakra conductive matrix. Tenten yelled, brandishing a GL-owing hot piece of metal with a pair of tongs. It's scientifically unsound. My dear, pugnacious weaponsmith, Mayuri's tinny voice crackled from the speaker, dripping with condescending amusement. Your science is the adorable fumbling of a clever child in a dark room. I am attempting to give you the gift of true, enlightened discovery. Imagine a blade that not only cuts its opponent but also devours their very soul for analysis. The data would be exquisite. It's also an abomination and a war crime. Tenten shot back. Naruto cleared his throat. Tenten glanced over, her face flushed with a mixture of fury and exertion. When she saw him, her expression softened instantly. Sorry, Lord Mayuri, I have an urgent appointment. We'll continue this later. She terminated the connection before the Shinigami captain could protest, plunging the hot metal into a quenching trough with a satisfying hiss. She wiped her hands on a rag, leaving a streak of soot on her cheek. Gods, I hate that man. But he's the most brilliant mind I've ever met. It's infuriating. She looked Naruto up and down. He was dressed in a formal, black Monsuki haori, the traditional wedding attire, with the white, swirling crest of the Uzumaki clan proudly displayed on the back and chest. You clean up nice, she said, a genuine, warm smile spreading across her face. Nervous. A little, he admitted. Fought literal gods. Stared down the end of the universe, but this feels bigger. It is, she said, her voice soft. She walked over and straightened the lapel of his haori. The rest of that was about saving the world. This is about building one. She stepped back, her eyes shining with pride. You did good, Naruto. Not just with all the cosmic stuff. But here. This place, she gestured around her lab. This new age of discovery. It's because of you. You didn't just save the world, you made it bigger. Don't ever forget that. He gave her a hug, a quick, heartfelt embrace. Thanks, Tenten, for everything. The gauntlet, it saved my life. Just make sure you save me a piece of cake, she grinned. I'll see you at the ceremony. His next stop was a world away in temperament. The Hyuga compound was quiet, serene. The snows of winter having given way to the vibrant green of spring. He was greeted not with suspicion, but with a deep, respectful bow from the clan elders. He was led to the same guard, and where he and Hinata had had their final, heartbreaking conversation. She was there, tending to a bed of newly bloomed irises, her movements graceful and sure. She wore the formal robes of the clan head, her bearing regal and composed. But when she saw him, she offered a smile that was pure, uncomplicated warmth. The sadness that had once haunted their interactions was gone, replaced by the strength of a deep and abiding friendship. Naruto-kun, she said, her voice as gentle as the spring breeze. You came. I couldn't not, he said, standing beside her. The garden looks happy. It is a season of new life, she replied, her pale eyes meeting his. For all of us. She led him to the veranda, where they sat. There was no tension, no subtext, only the easy comfort of two souls had found their proper place in the world, and in each other's lives. I have something for you, she said, presenting him with a small, beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a pair of pure white silk gloves. Woven into the fabric, so subtly they were almost invisible, were Hyuga protection seals. For the ceremony. A blessing from our clan. May your future be shielded from harm, and may your vision of the path ahead always be clear. Hinata. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's beautiful. You have found a good path, Naruto-kun, she said, looking out at the vibrant garden. And you walk it with a good woman. The Hyuga are proud to stand with you. I am proud to stand with you. She finally turned to him, her smile reaching her eyes. Go. Be happy. You of all people have earned it. Their goodbye was not an ending, but a new beginning. It was the closing of a chapter, a story of young love that had matured into a profound, platonic respect that would, he knew, be a cornerstone of his life forever. His journey then took him to the gate, to the very edge of the world he knew. Just beyond the massive, guarded facility, a new, small village was taking root. It was a chaotic, vibrant place. Its buildings a mishmash of styles, its air filled with the sounds of construction and the chatter of red-haired children. The Uzumaki spiral was everywhere. This was the new Uzushiogakure. A refugee camp turning into a home. He found Karen directing a group of newcomers, her voice sharp and authoritative. When she saw him, she broke off, a wide, predatory grin spreading across her face. Well, she said, circling him, her sensory perception scanning him from head to toe. Look at you, all dressed up like a proper clan head. Trying to impress someone. Something like that, Naruto grinned back. The fierce, almost painful possessiveness in her had mellowed over the year, maturing into a powerful, familial protectiveness. She was no longer a girl with a crush, she was a matriarch. The fierce guardian of their scattered family. I'm proud of you, Karen, he said seriously. Look what you've built. We built, she corrected him, punching his arm lightly. You're the symbol, Baka. The reason they all came. The hero of the Uzumaki. She turned and looked at the bustling village, her expression softening. It's a good start. A place for our family to be safe. She turned back to him. Her eyes sharp. That woman you're marrying. The Shinigami. She's good for you. Her energy is calm. It soothes the silence inside you. I can feel it. She poked a finger into his chest. You mess this up, and I'll personally drag you back here by your ear, got it? Got it, he laughed. She was still intense, still Karen, and he wouldn't have her any other way. His final visit was unannounced. He simply appeared on the highest point of the Hokage monument, where another figure was already waiting for him, stretched out lazily in the sun. Cutting it a little close, aren't we? Yoruichi purred, not opening her eyes. Bad form to be late for your own wedding. Just wanted one last look, he said, gazing out at the village, a sprawling tapestry of life and color under the spring sun. Good view, she said. In a blur, she was on her feet, standing before him, a dangerous glint in her golden eyes. Before you tie yourself down and get all slow and domesticated, how about one last dance? For old time's sake. Before he could answer, she attacked. It was not a real fight, but a spar, a conversation told in the language of motion. It was a whirlwind of Shunpo and Sage-enhanced speed. Of Hakuda and Frog Kata, a blur of gold and black against the blue sky. Their movements were perfectly matched, a dance of two masters who knew each other's rhythms intimately. It ended, as it always did, in a draw, with them standing panting and laughing, a hair's breadth from each other. You've gotten faster, she conceded, a genuine note of respect in her voice. You taught me well, he replied. She clapped him on the shoulder, her expression turning from rival to friend. She's a lucky woman, Naruto Uzumaki. And you're a lucky man. Her grin turned wicked. Quote, try not to be too boring in your old age. With a wink and a puff of smoke, she was gone, leaving him alone with the wind and the view of his home. The wedding was held in the grand garden of the embassy. Beneath the boughs of ancient cherry blossom trees that were in full, glorious bloom. The air was thick with the sweet, delicate scent of the petals, which fell in gentle, pink flurries with every passing breeze. It was a gathering of legends. The cage of all 5 great nations sat in the front row, their colorful robes a vibrant slash against the disciplined black and white of the Gote 13 captains who sat opposite them. Shunsui Kyoraku shared a gourd of sake with a bemused Kakashi. Captain Yukitake, looking healthier than Rukia had seen him in years, chatted quietly with Tsunade. Naruto stood before the makeshift altar. His friends, Shikamaru, Sai, Kiba, and the others, standing with him. He looked out at the impossible crowd, a sea of faces from 2 worlds, all gathered in peace. And then he saw her. She walked down the aisle, which was a path of pure white sand, on the arm of her brother. Rukia Kuchiki was a pillar of aristocratic ice, his face impassive, but his grip on his sister's arm was gentle. His steps perfectly in sync with hers. Rukia was breathtaking. She wore a traditional, pure white wedding kimono, and shiromuku, its fabric so white it seemed to glow. Her black hair was adorned with a single, elegant silver camellia. Her face was a mask of serene, happy calm, her violet eyes fixed on only one person in the entire world. As Byakuya reached the altar, he placed Rukia's hand in Naruto's. For a moment, the noble captain's cool gray eyes met Naruto's blue ones. There was no animosity, no condescension. There was only a silent, profound understanding, and a single, almost imperceptible nod of acceptance. He had not just given away his sister, he had entrusted the future of his family, and in a way, his world, to this unpredictable, sun-bright shinobi. The ceremony was a blend of traditions, officiated by a Shinto priest and Captain Commander Kyoraku himself. Vows were exchanged, promises made not just between a man and a woman, but between 2 worlds. When it was over, and Naruto stood beside his wife, Rukia Uzumaki, the cheer that went up seemed to shake the very heavens. Later, as the celebration swirled around them, Naruto stole Rukia away. They walked, hand in hand, to a secluded corner of the garden where a single, ancient cherry tree stood, its branches heavy with blossoms, creating a pink canopy against the twilight sky. They stood in a comfortable, profound silence for a long time, simply being together, the chaos of the universe finally at a distance. A gentle breeze rustled the branches, sending a shower of pink petals down around them. What are you thinking about? Rukia asked softly, her head resting on his shoulder. Everything, he answered honestly. And nothing at all. I'm just happy. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft light of the paper lanterns, and his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. He thought of the power that resided within him, the perfect, silent void he had absorbed and made a part of himself. It was not a weapon or a curse anymore. It was just him. It was the stillness that gave his own vibrant, chaotic life its definition. He raised his right hand, the one that had on. Ce brought an unnatural winter to the forest. He focused, not on the grand, cosmic scale of his power, but on the smallest, most intimate application of it. He reached out and touched the concept of the air around them. From the sky, amidst the falling pink cherry blossoms, a second flurry began. Tiny, perfect, 6-sided snowflakes, glittering like diamond dust in the lantern light, began to drift down, mixing with the petals. They were not cold. They did not chill the warm spring air. They were a gentle, silent miracle, a touch of quiet winter in the heart of a vibrant spring. Rukia gasped softly, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched the impossible, beautiful sight. A pink petal landed on her hand, followed by a perfect, glittering snowflake that did not melt, a tiny, fleeting jewel. She looked up at her husband. At his warm, smiling face, at the love shining in his blue eyes, and she understood. This was his power now. Not the power to end worlds, but the power to create a single, perfect, beautiful moment for the person he loved. The past was a story of survival. The future was an unknown adventure. But here, now, under a sky of falling petals and impossible snow, there was only a profound, and perfect, peace. Chapter 10 End.